The woman they called worthless just saved a dying ranch, and the man who never loved anyone. In 1879, Wyoming, where blizzards bury dreams and men measure worth in cattle and coin, Eliza Hartwell was invisible. 27 years old, unmarried, unwanted, a ghost in her own town. Until the day a desperate rancher appeared at her door with an impossible offer: feed 20 brutal cowhands or watch them starve. What happened next changed everything. This is the story of a woman who refused to disappear, a love that defied every rule, and a winter that tested whether courage could ever be enough. Stay until the end. Like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing, carrying ice and judgment in equal measure. It rattled the shutters of Eliza Hartwell's cabin, barely more than 4 walls and a stove, and whispered through the gaps in the timber with a voice that sounded almost human, almost mocking. She didn't look up from her work. Her hands moved steadily through the dough, kneading with a rhythm born from years of solitude. Flour dusted her worn sleeves, and her fingers, red from cold and roughened by labor, pressed and folded with practiced precision. The cabin smelled of rising bread and wood smoke, warmth clinging stubbornly to the corners despite the frost creeping across the window panes. Outside, the town of Coldwater, Wyoming, sprawled across the valley floor like a collection of broken teeth. 30 buildings, maybe 40 if you counted the half-collapsed structures at the edge of the settlement. A place where survival wasn't guaranteed and kindness was a luxury few could afford. Eliza had lived on its outskirts for 3 years. 3 years of silence. 3 years of being the woman people looked past, looked through, or looked at with something worse than hatred, pity mixed with contempt. She was 27 years old. In frontier terms, that made her ancient, a spinster, a failure. The kind of woman whispered about in doorways and pitied in Sunday gatherings she no longer attended. No man would take her, they said. Plain as a fence post, they said. Probably couldn't keep a house anyway, they said. Eliza had stopped listening 2 years ago, or at least she'd taught herself to pretend she had. The truth lived deeper, in the space between her ribs where breath sometimes caught and refused to release. The truth was that words, no matter how many times you heard them, never quite lost their edge. They just learned to cut in different places. She shaped the dough into loaves and set them near the stove to rise, then moved to the window. Through the frost-etched glass, she could see the town below. Smoke rose from chimneys. Horses stood tied outside the saloon. Life continued, indifferent and relentless. A knock shattered the silence. Eliza froze. No one came to her door. Not neighbors, not travelers, not even the children who sometimes dared each other to run past her cabin, laughing as if proximity to her solitude might be contagious. The knock came again. Harder this time. Deliberate. She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed the small room, her heartbeat suddenly loud in her ears. When she opened the door, the cold hit her like a fist. Standing on her threshold was a man she'd seen only from a distance, Dawson Cole, owner of the largest cattle ranch in the territory. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved by wind and weather into something that looked more like stone than flesh. His hat shadowed his eyes, but she could feel his gaze measuring her with the same practicality he'd used to assess a horse or a stretch of grazing land. "Miss Hartwell?" His voice was low, roughened by years of shouting over wind and cattle. "Mr. Cole." She kept her hand on the door, ready to close it if necessary. Men like him didn't appear at her door with good intentions. Men like him didn't appear at her door at all. "I have a proposition." Eliza said nothing. She'd learned that silence made people uncomfortable enough to leave, but Dawson Cole didn't leave. He shifted his weight, and something in the movement suggested exhaustion barely held in check. "I need a cook," he said. 20 men, 3 meals a day, room and board included, wages fair." The words hung in the frozen air between them. Eliza's throat tightened. "You're serious?" "I don't joke about business." "Why me?" The question came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't soften it. She'd heard too many cruel pranks disguised as opportunities, watched too many people enjoy the sport of humiliating someone they considered beneath them. Dawson's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Not pity, not mockery. Something closer to recognition. "Because my last cook quit yesterday," he said. Because winter's coming hard and early, because I've got a ranch to run and men to feed, and I don't have time to be particular. He paused. And because Martha Gibbons at the Mercantile said you're the best baker in the territory, even if nobody else has the sense to know it. Eliza felt something crack open inside her chest. Not hope, exactly, but something dangerously close to it. 20 men, she repeated. Cowboys. Ranch hands, cattle drivers, a few drifters I hired for the season. His jaw tightened. Rough types. Not much for manners, but they'll respect you or answer to me. And if they don't respect me, then I'll make them wish they had. There was no warmth in the statement, no gallantry, just fact delivered with the same bluntness he'd used to discuss fence repairs. Eliza studied him. His coat was expensive but worn. His boots were good quality but caked with mud and manure. This was a man who worked alongside his men, who understood the difference between owning land and earning it. When would I start? Tomorrow. Dawn. I know it's fast. For the first time, something almost like desperation crossed his features. But I'm out of options, Miss Hartwell. You turn me down, I'll have a near mutiny on my hands by week's end. Hungry men are dangerous men. Eliza looked past him, toward the town that had never wanted her, toward the life that had shrunk down to four walls in the company of her own breathing. Then she looked back at Dawson Cole and saw something she hadn't expected to see directed at her need, not want, not desire, not even kindness, just the raw, honest need of a man who'd run out of choices and was offering her the same chance he was taking. I'll do it, she said. Dawson nodded once. Be ready at first light. I'll send a wagon. He turned to leave, then paused. Miss Hartwell? Yes? They're going to test you, every one of them. It's not personal. It's just the way things work out here. You understand? I understand, Eliza said quietly. I've been tested my whole life. Something almost like respect crossed Dawson's face. Then he was gone, swallowed by the winter dusk. Eliza closed the door and leaned against it, her hands shaking, not from fear, not from cold, from the terrifying possibility that something in her life was about to change. Tag. The wagon arrived just as the sun broke over the eastern peaks, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and blood. Eliza was waiting. She'd packed everything she owned into 2 canvas bags, clothes, a few books, her grandmother's recipes written in fading ink on yellowed paper, and the cast-iron skillet that had been her only companion through 3 winters of solitude. She wore her best dress, which wasn't saying much, and a heavy wool coat that had belonged to her father. The driver was a young man, barely 20, with nervous eyes and a tendency to look everywhere except directly at her. Morning, miss, he mumbled, helping her bags into the wagon bed. Name's Jesse. Mr. Cole sent me to fetch you. Thank you, Jesse. The ride took 40 minutes, following a rutted road that climbed into the foothills. The land opened up before them, vast stretches of grassland broken by stands of pine and aspen, creeks running silver between the rocks, and in the distance, the jagged teeth of the Wind River Range cutting into a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Eliza had never been this far from town. She'd never realized the world was this big. There, Jesse said, pointing. Cole Ranch spread across a wide valley like something out of a dream or a nightmare, depending on your perspective. The main house was a 2-story structure of logs and stone, solid and imposing. Barns and outbuildings clustered around it like children around a mother. Corrals held dozens of horses and hundreds of cattle dotted the distant pastures like dark stones scattered across gold cloth. But it was the bunkhouse that drew her attention. Long and low, with smoke rising from 2 chimneys, it squatted at the edge of the yard like a barracks preparing for war. 20 men lived there, 20 men who would judge her, test her, and decide whether she deserved to stay. The wagon stopped in front of a separate building, smaller than the bunkhouse but larger than her cabin. A weathered sign above the door read, Cookhouse. Jesse helped her down. Mr. Cole's with the cattle, but he said to show you around, get you settled. The cookhouse was a revelation. A massive iron stove dominated one wall, big enough to feed an army. Long wooden tables filled the center of the room, scarred and stained from years of use. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with sacks of flour, sugar, beans, dried meat, and vegetables. A separate pantry held preserved goods, and through a side door Eliza glimpsed a small bedroom, simple but clean, with a real bed and a window overlooking the valley. It was more than she'd had in years. Men eat at 6, noon, and 6, Jessie explained. Breakfast is usually biscuits, bacon, eggs if we got 'em. Lunch is whatever's quick. Dinner's the big meal, meat, potatoes, beans, bread. Mr. Cole's particular about bread. I can make bread, Eliza said softly. Yes, ma'am. That's what Martha Gibbons said. Jessie shuffled his feet. Listen, Miss Hartwell, the men, they're going to give you trouble at first. It's nothing personal. They're used to things a certain way. What way is that? Jessie's face reddened. They're used to being able to say whatever they want, do whatever they want. Last cook was a man named Dutch, old cavalry cook, didn't take grief from nobody. You're different. Because I'm a woman. Yes, ma'am. Eliza moved to the stove, running her hand along its surface, still warm from morning coffee. Thank you for the warning, Jessie. I'll manage. Yes, ma'am. He didn't sound convinced. I'll leave you to get settled. Dinner's at 6. Bell rings at 5:30. When he was gone, Eliza stood alone in the cookhouse and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd agreed to. 20 men. 3 meals a day. In a place where she had no allies, no friends, no one who would defend her if things went wrong. But she'd also left behind a town that had made her invisible, a life that had shrunk down to nothing. And for the first time in years, someone had needed her for something more than pity or mockery. That had to count for something. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The bell rang at 5:30. Eliza had spent the afternoon preparing. She'd kneaded enough dough for 4 dozen biscuits, seasoned 3 roasts, peeled 2 buckets of potatoes, and made a gravy that filled the cookhouse with the smell of butter and black pepper. Now she stood behind the serving counter and watched them come. They entered in groups of 2 and 3, stomping mud from their boots and talking in the loud, careless way of men who'd spent all day working outside. Their voices died as they noticed her. The silence spread like a disease. 20 pairs of eyes fixed on her. 20 men ranging from teenage boys to grizzled veterans with faces like cracked leather. Some looked curious. Some looked amused. A few looked outright hostile. A man near the front, tall and raw-boned, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, let out a low whistle. Well, hell, he said. Cole finally got desperate. Laughter rippled through the group. Eliza kept her face neutral, but her hands clenched beneath the counter. She'd expected this. Jessie had warned her. But knowing something and experiencing it were different creatures entirely. The scarred man swaggered forward. Name's Flint. I run the crew. He looked her up and down with the same expression he might use to assess a lame horse. You the new cook? I am. You know what you're doing? I know how to cook. That right? Flint leaned on the counter, invading her space deliberately. Well, let me tell you how things work here, sweetheart. We work hard, we eat hard, we don't have time for fancy cooking or delicate sensibilities. You gonna cry if somebody says something that hurts your feelings? Behind him, several men snickered. Eliza met his eyes. I'm going to cook your dinner. You're going to eat it or go hungry. Those are your choices. Flint's smile sharpened. You got a mouth on you, I like that. Let's see if you can back it up. He took his plate and moved to the serving line. The others followed, filing past her with varying degrees of curiosity and contempt. She served them methodically, roast beef, mashed potatoes, gravy, biscuits, ignoring the comments that floated her direction. Bet she burns the biscuits. Probably can't tell salt from sugar. Give her a week before she's crying to Cole. Eliza's hands didn't shake. She'd survived worse than words. She'd survived being invisible. At least here, they were looking at her. When every man had been served, she took her own plate and retreated to the kitchen, giving them space to eat without her presence hovering. She didn't have to wait long. The first sound was a grunt of surprise, then another, then the unmistakable sound of men eating with focused intensity, the way hungry men ate when the food was better than expected. The conversation died. Eliza allowed herself a small, private smile. She'd spent 3 years learning to cook for herself, perfecting recipes to fill the empty hours. She'd learned that food could be more than sustenance. It could be comfort, memory, connection. She'd learned to taste what was missing and add it back. Now she listened to 20 men discover what she already knew, that hunger could be satisfied with meat and bread, but loneliness required something more subtle. She'd given them both. When she emerged to clear plates, the atmosphere had shifted. Not friendly, not yet, but less hostile. A few men nodded as she passed. One mumbled "thank you" into his coffee. Flint was the last to leave. He paused at the door, his expression unreadable. "Not bad," he said finally, "for a first try." It wasn't much, but it was something. After they'd gone, Eliza scrubbed dishes until her hands were raw, banked the stove, and retreated to her small room. She sat on the bed, a real bed, with a mattress and blankets, and felt exhaustion wash over her like a wave. She'd survived day 1, 19 more to go before they decided whether to keep her. She was asleep before she could worry about it. The pattern repeated for 3 days. She cooked. They ate. The comments continued, but with less venom. A few men started asking for seconds. Jesse began showing up early to help carry supplies. Even Flint stopped making jokes at her expense, though he watched her with an intensity that suggested he was waiting for her to fail. On the 4th morning, Dawson Cole appeared in the cookhouse. Eliza looked up from the stove, where she was frying bacon for breakfast. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in the domestic space. "Mr. Cole?" "Miss Hartwell." He cleared his throat. "Wanted to check how you're settling." "Fine, thank you." "The men giving you trouble?" "Nothing I can't handle." Dawson studied her for a long moment. "I've been hearing things." Eliza's stomach tightened. "What kind of things?" "That you're a damn good cook. That Flint actually smiled yesterday. First time in 6 months. That morning biscuits are the highlight of their day." He paused. "That Dutch couldn't touch what you're serving." Relief flooded through her. "That's kind of them to say. It's not kindness. It's fact." Dawson moved closer, and Eliza became acutely aware of how small the cookhouse suddenly felt. "I don't give compliments. I don't mean Miss Hartwell. You're doing good work. Better than good." "Thank you. But I want you to know something." His voice dropped lower. "You have any trouble, real trouble, you come to me, immediately. I meant what I said. These men respect you, or they answer to me. That's not negotiable." Eliza met his eyes. They were gray, she noticed, the color of storm clouds before snow. "I appreciate that, Mr. Cole, but I can fight my own battles." "I don't doubt it." Something almost like admiration crossed his face. "But you don't have to fight them alone. Not anymore." The words settled into that space between her ribs where breath sometimes caught, where truth lived alongside all the lies she'd been told about her worth. "I'll remember that," she said quietly. Dawson nodded and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. "Eliza." It was the first time he'd used her given name. It sounded strange in his rough voice, careful, almost gentle. "Yes?" "You belong here. Don't let anyone tell you different." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the smell of bacon and the echo of words she'd never expected to hear. 2 weeks into her tenure at Cole Ranch, the rhythm of the work became almost meditative. She woke before dawn, started the stove, made coffee strong enough to wake the dead. By the time the men stumbled in for breakfast, she had biscuits ready, eggs frying, bacon crisping, and oatmeal simmering with cinnamon and brown sugar. She learned their names, their preferences, their stories. Jesse liked his eggs runny. Flint took his coffee black and bitter. An older man named Dutch, not the cook, different Dutch, couldn't eat beans without heartburn, so she made him a separate portion without seasoning. A quiet boy named Thomas reminded her to save the burnt edges of cornbread because they were his favorite. She began to notice other things too. The way they moved when they came in from the range, stiff joints, sore muscles, exhaustion that went bone deep. The way some of them lingered after meals, reluctant to return to the cold and the work. The way they watched her when they thought she wasn't looking, as if trying to figure out what she was doing there. She was trying to figure out the same thing. But slowly, something began to change. The comments stopped. The laughter at her expense died away. Men started thanking her by name. A few brought her things from town. A new stirring spoon, extra sugar, once a book of recipes they thought she might like. Flint became her unlikely ally. He started enforcing a rule she'd never asked for: clean boots before entering the cookhouse. When a new hire made a crude joke about her appearance, Flint took him outside and they had a conversation that left the man apologetic and nursing a split lip. "Didn't need to do that," Eliza told him later. Flint shrugged. "Respect's earned. You earned it. He didn't give it. That's a problem I know how to solve." Even the work itself became easier. Jessie started helping with dishes. Thomas chopped vegetables without being asked. Dutch, the older one, brought her wildflowers he'd found near the creek. Thought they might brighten the place up. She put them in a mason jar on the serving counter and felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Hope. The kind that made you vulnerable. The kind that could break you if you weren't careful. 3 weeks in, the weather turned. The temperature dropped 20 degrees overnight. Snow began falling in earnest. Not the light dustings they'd been getting, but heavy, wet snow that piled up in drifts and made every task twice as hard. The men came in from the range looking like ghosts, covered in white, shaking with cold that had settled into their bones. Eliza had soup waiting. Thick beef stew with vegetables and dumplings, bread fresh from the oven, coffee spiked with a little whiskey from the bottle Dawson kept for medicinal purposes. She served them in silence, watching them thaw. "Thank God for you, Miss Eliza," Jesse said, wrapping his hands around his bowl. "I thought I was going to lose a few fingers out there." "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad enough. We lost 3 head in a ravine, couldn't get to them in time." He shook his head. "Mr. Cole's out there now with Flint and the others, trying to move the rest to lower ground before the real storm hits." "Real storm?" "This is just the warning." Jesse's young face looked older in the lamplight. "The big one's coming tomorrow or the next day. When it hits, we'll be snowed in for a week at least." Eliza's stomach tightened. "What do you need me to do?" "Keep cooking. Keep us fed. That's all any of us can ask." But Eliza knew it was more than that. In weather like this, food wasn't just fuel. It was morale. It was the difference between men who kept fighting and men who gave up. She doubled her bread production, made extra stew and stored it in the cold room, prepared enough biscuits to last 3 days. When supplies ran low, she got creative, stretching beef with beans, using bacon fat to flavor vegetables, making desserts from dried fruit and sugar to give them something to look forward to. The men noticed. "You're working too hard," Thomas told her one evening, finding her still in the kitchen long after dinner had ended. "So are all of you." "Yeah, but we got no choice. You could take it easier." Eliza looked at the boy, 17, maybe 18, far from home and trying to prove himself. "Do you know why I'm here, Thomas? Mr. Cole hired you. Mr. Cole gave me a chance when no one else would, gave me a place when I didn't have one, gave me purpose when I'd forgotten what that felt like." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Working hard isn't a burden, it's a privilege. Don't ever forget that." Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." After he left, Eliza stood alone in the quiet cookhouse and realized something that should have terrified her. She was starting to care about these people. These rough, hard men who'd mocked her on day one and now looked at her like she mattered. She was starting to care about this place, and caring meant she could be hurt. The big storm hit on a Tuesday. Eliza woke to a world transformed. Snow fell so thick she couldn't see the bunkhouse 50 feet away. Wind screamed around the cookhouse like something alive and furious. The temperature had dropped so far that frost formed on the inside of the windows. She built up the stove and started breakfast, but her mind was elsewhere. The men hadn't come in yet. By 6:30, she was worried. By 7, she was standing at the door, peering into the white chaos. Then she saw them. Dark shapes emerging from the blizzard like survivors from a shipwreck. They stumbled into the cookhouse covered in ice, faces red and raw, breathing hard. Dawson was the last through the door. He looked worse than the rest, exhaustion etched into every line of his face, ice crusted in his hair and beard, moving with the careful deliberation of a man who'd pushed himself to the absolute limit. "Everyone accounted for?" His voice was hoarse from shouting over the wind. "All here, boss," Flint confirmed. "Good." Dawson's eyes found Eliza. "Anyone hurt?" "Few cases of frostbite," Flint said. Nothing serious. Get them warm, get them fed." Dawson moved toward the door. "You need to sit down before you fall down," Eliza said firmly. Every head in the room turned toward her. She crossed to Dawson and took his arm. "You're hypothermic. Your lips are blue and you're shaking. Sit down." For a moment she thought he might argue. Dawson Cole didn't take orders from anyone, but then something in his expression shifted, surprise maybe, or respect, and he allowed her to guide him to a chair. "Coffee," she ordered, and Jesse jumped to pour a cup. "Someone get blankets." "Thomas, stoke that stove higher." The men moved to obey, and Eliza realized with a shock that they were listening to her. Actually listening. As if she had authority here. As if she belonged. She brought Dawson the coffee, wrapping his frozen hands around the cup. His fingers were ice cold, and she held them for a moment longer than necessary, making sure he had the grip strength to hold on. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank me when you're not dying of exposure." His mouth quirked. Bossy. Practical. She released his hands and stepped back. "Now drink that while I get you real food." She served them all, hot oatmeal with butter and honey, bacon, eggs, biscuits with jam, and endless coffee. She watched them eat with the focused intensity of men who'd looked death in the face and walked away. When the meal was finished and warmth had returned to the room, Dawson stood. "Storm's going to last 3 days, maybe 4, he said. "Nobody goes outside except for essential work. We've got enough supplies to last if we're smart about it. Miss Hartwell will keep us fed." He glanced at Eliza. "Right?" "Right," she confirmed. "Then we hunker down and wait it out." Dawson looked at each man in turn. "This is what we do. This is what we're good at. Surviving when other people would quit. Remember that." It should have been dramatic. Instead, it was just truth delivered plainly. The men dispersed, some to the bunkhouse to sleep, others to tend horses and livestock in the barn. Dawson lingered. "You handled that well," he said. Eliza began clearing plates. "Handled what?" "Taking charge, making them listen." They were cold and tired. Anyone would have listened. "No." Dawson moved closer. "They listened because they trust you. That's not something you can demand. It has to be earned." He paused. "You've earned it." Eliza's throat tightened. "I'm just doing my job." "You're doing more than that." His voice was rough, but something softer moved beneath it. "You're holding this place together. Don't think I haven't noticed." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with dirty dishes and words that echoed in the empty space like a promise. Oh, the storm raged for 4 days. 4 days of howling wind and snow that fell like punishment from an angry sky. 4 days of being trapped inside, rationing supplies, keeping the stoves burning, and fighting the cabin fever that made men restless and dangerous. Eliza cooked steadily through it all. She made soups that stretched ingredients to their limit, baked bread that filled the cookhouse with warmth and the smell of yeast and hope, created desserts from almost nothing, molasses cookies, dried apple cake, pudding made from the last of the milk. She also learned to listen. The men talked during those long, snowbound days, told stories, shared memories, revealed pieces of themselves they normally kept hidden beneath layers of toughness and pride. She learned that Jesse had a sweetheart back in Kansas he was saving money to marry, that Flint had fought in the Indian Wars and carried scars that went deeper than the one on his face, that Thomas was an orphan who'd been working since he was 12, that Dutch had lost his wife to cholera and hadn't spoken her name aloud in 10 years. She learned that Dawson Cole had built this ranch from nothing, that he'd arrived in Wyoming with $50 and a dream, bought land nobody wanted, and turned it into something that mattered through sheer stubbornness and backbreaking work. She learned that he was respected, feared, admired, but never loved, because he didn't allow anyone close enough for that. And she learned that he was watching her, not obviously, not intrusively, but she felt his eyes tracking her movements, noticed the way he positioned himself to be near her during meals, observed the small ways he made sure she had what she needed before she had to ask. It should have made her uncomfortable. Instead, it made her feel seen. On the 4th day, the storm broke. The wind died. The snow stopped. The sky cleared to a blue so bright it hurt. The men emerged from the bunkhouse like prisoners released from confinement, shouting and laughing, throwing snowballs like children despite being exhausted and work-worn. Eliza stood in the cookhouse doorway and watched them, something warm and painful expanding in her chest. These were her people now. This was her home. And the woman who'd been invisible in cold water, the woman nobody wanted, the woman who'd believed she had nothing to offer, that woman was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone stronger, someone who'd learned that worth wasn't given by others. It was claimed by refusing to disappear. Beautiful, isn't it? She turned to find Dawson beside her, his eyes on the valley rather than the men. The snow? She asked. All of it. He glanced at her. You ever think about how much can change in a month? Every day, Eliza said quietly. 4 weeks ago, I had a ranch falling apart because nobody wanted to cook for rough men in the middle of nowhere. His voice was thoughtful. Now I have the best meals I've eaten in 5 years, and a crew that actually looks forward to coming inside. They just appreciate not starving. No, Dawson turned to face her fully. They appreciate you. There's a difference. Eliza's heart was beating too fast. Mr. Cole? Dawson, he interrupted. Just Dawson. Dawson, she repeated, and the name felt strange and right on her tongue. I should get back to work. Eliza, she stopped. Thank you, he said simply, for staying, for not quitting when they tested you, for being exactly what this place needed. Before she could find words to respond, he walked away, leaving her standing in the doorway with the winter sun on her face and the impossible, terrifying, wonderful knowledge that something was shifting between them, something that went beyond employer and employee, something that felt like the beginning of a story she'd stopped believing she'd ever get to write. She touched her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palm, and allowed herself to hope, just a little, just enough. The weeks that followed, the storm settled into a rhythm that felt almost like belonging. Eliza rose each morning in the darkness before dawn, her breath misting in the cold air of her small room. She'd light the lamp, wrap herself in the heavy shawl that had been her mother's, and pad barefoot across the wooden floor to start the cookhouse stove. The ritual had become sacred somehow. The scrape of the match, the first bloom of flame, the gradual spreading of warmth that pushed back against the Wyoming winter. By the time the men arrived for breakfast, she had transformed the cookhouse into something that felt less like a feeding station and more like a refuge. Coffee steamed in large pots. Biscuits emerged from the oven, golden and perfect. Bacon sizzled on the griddle, and eggs waited to be cracked into hot skillets at just the right moment. She'd learned the precise timing of it all, when to start cooking so everything finished together, how to keep food warm without drying it out, how to make enough without waste. But more than that, she'd learned to read the men themselves. She could tell by the way they walked in whether the work had been hard or brutal, could see in their faces whether they needed silence or conversation, could sense when someone was hurting in ways that had nothing to do with sore muscles or cold, stiffened joints, and she fed them accordingly. On the hard days, she made comfort food, thick gravy over biscuits, pot roast that fell apart at the touch of a fork, potatoes mashed with butter and cream. On the days when spirits were low, she made things that surprised them. Cinnamon rolls on a Tuesday, fried chicken for no special reason, apple pie that made Jesse close his eyes and sigh like he was remembering something precious. You're spoiling us, Flint told her one morning, his scarred face softening as he bit into a bear claw she'd made on a whim. Is that a complaint? Eliza asked. Hell no, just stating a fact. He studied her with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. You know half these boys are half in love with you, right? Eliza's hand stilled on the serving spoon. That's ridiculous. Is it? Flint gestured toward the tables where the men ate with focused devotion. Dutch brings you flowers twice a week. Thomas follows you around like a puppy. Even the new hires stop cussing when you're in earshot. He paused. And the boss? Mr. Cole appreciates good cooking, Eliza interrupted quickly. That's all. Flint's knowing smile said he didn't believe her for a second, but he let it drop. The truth was more complicated than Flint knew. Or maybe it was simpler. Eliza couldn't decide which frightened her more. Dawson had started appearing in the cookhouse at odd hours. Not during meals when the place was full of noise and hungry men, but in the quiet spaces between, mid-morning when she was prepping for lunch, late afternoon when she was starting dinner, sometimes in the evening after the dishes were done and she was planning the next day's menu. He never stayed long, never said much, but his presence had weight, and Eliza felt it like pressure against her skin. "Need anything from town?" he'd ask, leaning against the doorframe with his hat in his hands. "No, thank you. I'm well stocked." "Stove working all right? I notice the door sticks sometimes." "I'll have Jesse look at it." "I can do it myself." And he would, right then. Kneeling on her clean floor with tools and oil, fixing the problem with the same focused efficiency he brought to everything else while she tried to pretend his presence wasn't making her nervous. Other times he'd bring things. A sack of good coffee beans from a supplier in Cheyenne, fresh eggs from a neighboring ranch, once a book, a collection of recipes from a hotel in San Francisco. "Thought you might find something interesting in there," he said gruffly, setting it on the counter like it was nothing. But Eliza had seen the price written in pencil on the inside cover. $3. A small fortune for a book. "I can't accept this," she'd said. "It's for the ranch. Better recipes mean better food. Better food means the men work harder." His eyes met hers. "Call it a business investment." But they both knew it wasn't. The men noticed. Of course they noticed. 20 cowboys living in close quarters missed nothing, especially when their boss started acting differently around the new cook. "Boss seems happier these days," Jesse mentioned casually one afternoon while helping Eliza carry in supplies. "Does he?" Eliza kept her voice neutral. "Yes, ma'am. Smiles more. Doesn't bark at us as much." Jesse grinned. "Wonder what changed?" Eliza changed the subject, but the observation stuck with her. She'd noticed it too. The way Dawson's shoulders seemed less rigid when he entered the cookhouse. The way his face lost some of its hardness when he looked at her. The way he'd started saying her name, just Eliza, soft and careful, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth. It terrified her, because Eliza had learned young that wanting things was dangerous. Wanting led to disappointment. Wanting made you vulnerable. And she'd spent 3 years in cold water teaching herself not to want anything beyond survival. But now she wanted. She wanted the way his eyes lingered on her, wanted the rough gentleness in his voice when he spoke her name. Wanted the possibility of something she'd stopped believing existed for women like her. And that wanting felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing one wrong step would send her falling. The men had fully accepted her by then. What had started as grudging tolerance had transformed into something closer to affection. They defended her when strangers came through, bragged about her cooking to anyone who'd listen, made sure she had everything she needed before she had to ask. Thomas had appointed himself her unofficial assistant, showing up early to help with breakfast prep and staying late to wash dishes. Dutch brought her wildflowers even after the first snows had killed most of the blooms. He'd walk miles to find them growing in protected valleys. Flint enforced a code of conduct that would have made a finishing school proud. "We got us a lady now," he'd told the crew one evening when a new hire had gotten too familiar. "That means we act like gentlemen. Anyone got a problem with that can settle it with me out back." No one had a problem with it, but it was the small moments that meant the most to Eliza. The way Jesse would wordlessly take over stirring a pot when he saw her rubbing her sore wrist. The way the men had started cleaning up after themselves without being asked. The way they'd begun treating the cookhouse like sacred ground, removing hats, lowering voices, watching their language. She'd become their anchor, the thing that made the ranch feel less like a work camp and more like a home. And she'd become something else to Dawson. She saw it in the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, felt it in the careful distance he maintained as if he didn't trust himself to stand too close, heard it in his voice when he said her name. 6 weeks into her tenure at Cole Ranch, everything changed during a simple conversation about salt pork. Eliza was in the cold storage room taking inventory when Dawson appeared in the doorway. She didn't hear him approach. The man moved quietly for someone his size, and when she turned, he was just there, blocking the light. "Mr. Cole." Her heart jumped. "I didn't hear you come in." "Sorry, didn't mean to startle you." He stepped inside, and the small space suddenly felt smaller. "I was checking the supplies, making sure you have everything you need for winter." "I'm well stocked. The last delivery from town was generous." "Good." He picked up a jar of preserves, studied it like he'd never seen one before, set it back down. "Eliza, I need to ask you something." The use of her first name sent warmth spreading through her chest. All right. Are you happy here? The question caught her off guard. Yes, of course. I don't mean are you satisfied with the work, I mean, are you happy? His gray eyes found hers. Because if you're not, if this isn't what you wanted, I need to know. Eliza set down her inventory list. Why are you asking me this? Because I know what it's like to take a job out of desperation and wake up one day realizing you've trapped yourself. His voice was rough. And because you're too good at hiding what you're feeling. I can't read you the way I can read other people. What do you want me to say? The truth. Eliza took a breath. The cold storage room smelled of smoked meat and preserved vegetables, and Dawson stood close enough that she could see the ice crystals melting in his dark hair. The truth is that 6 weeks ago, I was living in a cabin the size of this storage room. I spoke to maybe 3 people a week, and all of them looked at me like I was something to be pitied or avoided. I went to bed every night wondering if this was all my life would ever be. Her voice steadied. Now I wake up with purpose. I cook for people who appreciate it. I'm part of something that matters. So yes, Dawson, I'm happy. Happier than I've been in years. Something shifted in his expression, relief mixed with something deeper, something that made her breath catch. Good, he said quietly. That's good. He should have left then, should have stepped back, given her space, returned to the dozens of tasks waiting for him outside. Instead, he moved closer. Can I tell you something? His voice had dropped lower, intimate in the cold air. Yes. When I came to your door that first day, I was desperate. The men were about to mutiny, the ranch was falling apart, and I was out of options. He paused. I expected you to say no. Expected you to slam the door in my face like everyone else had done. Why would I do that? Because I was offering you a job cooking for 20 rough men in the middle of nowhere for wages that barely covered room and board, because it was a terrible offer and we both knew it. It was the best offer I'd had in 3 years, Eliza said softly. I know, and that... His jaw tightened. That made me angry, not at you, at a world that could make a woman like you feel grateful for scraps. A woman like me? Strong, capable, someone who could run this whole damn ranch if I gave her half a chance. His hand came up, almost touching her face, then dropped. You saved this place, Eliza. You saved me, and I don't know how to thank you for that. Eliza's heart was hammering now. You don't need to thank me. You gave me a chance when no one else would. No, you gave yourself a chance. You just needed someone to open the door. He stepped back, creating distance. I should go. Let you get back to work. Dawson, yes? She didn't know what she wanted to say. Didn't know how to articulate the thing building between them, fragile and dangerous and real. Thank you, she said finally, for seeing me. His smile was small and sad. Hard not to. You're the only thing worth looking at in this whole valley. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the cold storage with her racing heart and the knowledge that something had fundamentally shifted between them. The next morning, everything seemed different. Dawson appeared for breakfast, which he rarely did. He sat at the far end of the table, eating in silence while the men talked and laughed around him. But his eyes kept finding Eliza as she moved through the cookhouse, and each time their gazes met, she felt that same electric current run through her. Flint noticed. Of course Flint noticed. Something happened between you and the boss? He asked quietly while she was refilling coffee. I don't know what you mean. The hell you don't. He's looking at you like a man who's made a decision and isn't sure if it's brilliant or stupid. Flint, I'm not judging, just observing. He lowered his voice further. But be careful, Eliza. Dawson Cole is a good man, but he's been alone a long time. He doesn't know how to do this. Neither do you. That combination can get messy. Eliza wanted to argue, but Flint was right. She had no idea what she was doing, had no experience with the thing growing between her and Dawson, had no template for how to navigate feelings this intense, this frightening, this real. She spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but her mind kept returning to that moment in the cold storage, to the way Dawson had looked at her, to the words he'd spoken. That evening, after the dishes were done and the men had retreated to the bunkhouse, she was sweeping the floor when he appeared again. "You keep showing up in my cookhouse," she said without looking up. "It's technically my cookhouse." "Then why does it feel like mine?" "Because you made it yours." He leaned against the counter. "Can we talk?" Eliza set the broom aside. "About what?" "About what I said yesterday, in the storage room." Her throat tightened. "You don't need to explain." "Yes, I do." He crossed to her, and this time he didn't maintain distance. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head to look up at him. "Because I meant every word, and because I'm tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel." "Dawson, let me finish." His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. "I'm not good with words. Never have been. I say things plain because fancy talk feels like lying, so I'm going to say this plain." He took a breath. "You walked into my life 6 weeks ago and turned everything upside down. Made me remember what it feels like to look forward to something other than work. Made this ranch feel less like a burden and more like a home. Made me—" He stopped, searching for words. "Made me want things I'd given up on wanting." Eliza's eyes burned. "What kind of things?" "Companionship, partnership, someone to talk to at the end of a long day, someone who understands what I'm trying to build here." His voice dropped. "Someone who looks at me and sees more than just the ranch owner, who sees me." "I do see you," Eliza whispered. "I've been seeing you." "Then you know what I'm trying to say." "I think so, but I need you to say it anyway." Dawson's hand came up, and this time he didn't stop himself. His fingers brushed her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so rough-hewn. "I care about you, Eliza Hartwell, more than I should, more than is probably wise. And I know you're my employee, and that makes this complicated, but I needed you to know." Eliza leaned into his touch before she could stop herself. "It's not one-sided." "No?" "No." She covered his hand with hers. "I care about you too. So much it scares me." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I've never mattered to anyone before, never been important. And the idea that I might matter to you, that feels too big, too impossible." "You matter," Dawson said fiercely. "To the men, to this ranch, to me." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "You matter more than anything." They stood like that for a long moment, the cookhouse silent around them except for the soft pop of cooling wood in the stove. "What happens now?" Eliza asked. "I don't know." But Dawson's honesty was brutal and beautiful. "I've never done this before, never wanted to. But I know I can't go back to pretending you're just my cook. Can't keep my distance anymore." "Then don't." His eyes darkened. "Eliza, I'm tired of being careful," she said. "Tired of protecting myself from disappointment. Tired of living small." She stepped closer. "You make me want to live big, to take risks, to believe I deserve good things." "You deserve everything," Dawson said roughly. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't practiced or smooth. It was the kiss of a man who'd forgotten how to do this, who was making it up as he went, who was pouring 6 weeks of restrained feeling into a single moment. Eliza kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, her whole body alive in ways it had never been before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. "This is going to complicate everything," he said. "I know. The men are going to have opinions. Let them. And if this goes wrong, then it goes wrong," Eliza interrupted. "But Dawson, what if it goes right?" He pulled back to look at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw hope in his eyes, raw and uncertain and beautiful. "Then I guess we find out together," he said. They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other like anchors in a storm, neither one willing to let go. Outside, winter pressed against the windows. Inside, something new was beginning, fragile and fierce and worth fighting for. The next few weeks were both wonderful and terrible. Wonderful because Eliza had never felt so alive. Every morning when Dawson appeared for breakfast felt like a gift. Every evening, conversation in the quiet cookhouse felt like stolen treasure. Every accidental brush of hands, every shared look, every moment of connection added to a growing warmth inside her chest. Terrible because hiding it from 20 observant cowboys was nearly impossible. They tried to be discreet, maintained professional distance in public, kept their conversations brief and businesslike when others were around. But the men weren't fools. "Boss is whistling," Jesse observed one morning. "Didn't know he could whistle." "He's also been smiling at breakfast," Thomas added. "Yesterday he actually laughed at Dutch's joke. That joke wasn't even funny." "And he's been spending an awful lot of time in the cookhouse," Flint said, looking directly at Eliza. "Checking on supplies, making sure the stove works. Real concerned about cookhouse maintenance all of a sudden." Eliza kept her face neutral. "Mr. Cole is thorough about ranch operations." "Mr. Cole never gave a damn about cookhouse operations until you got here," Flint said flatly. "But sure, we'll pretend it's about the stove." The knowing looks and barely suppressed grins made Eliza's face burn, but there was no malice in them. If anything, the men seemed pleased. "About time someone made him human again," Dutch said that evening while helping with dishes. "Been watching him turn into stone for 5 years. Nice to see him remember what living's for." "I don't know what you're talking about," Eliza protested weakly. "Sure you don't." Dutch's weathered face creased in a smile. "And I'm sure it's just coincidence that you've been humming while you cook, that you smile more, that you look happy in a way that has nothing to do with bread dough." Eliza gave up pretending. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to anyone with eyes." Dutch patted her shoulder. "Don't worry about it. We're happy for you both. Lord knows you both deserve some happiness." But happiness on the frontier was always temporary. The trouble started on a cold February afternoon when a supply wagon arrived from town with more than just flour and sugar. It brought news. Eliza was in the cookhouse when Jesse burst through the door, his young face tight with something between excitement and worry. "Miss Eliza, there's someone here to see Mr. Cole, a woman, from back east." Eliza's hand stilled on the bread dough she was kneading. "A woman?" "Yes, ma'am. Fancy looking. Arrived in a private carriage with enough luggage for a month." Jesse's voice dropped. "The wagon driver said her name's Lillian Voss, said she and Mr. Cole were engaged once, back before he came west." The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. "Engaged?" "That's what he said. Don't know if it's true or just gossip." Jesse looked uncomfortable. "Thought you should know before you heard it from someone else." Through the window, Eliza could see a knot of men gathered near the main house. And in the center, like a jewel in a rough setting, stood a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. She was beautiful. Not just pretty. Beautiful in a way that seemed almost unreal. Tall and graceful, with golden hair pinned in elaborate curls, wearing a traveling dress that probably cost more than Eliza would earn in a year. Even from a distance, she radiated the kind of polished elegance that spoke of money, breeding, and absolute confidence in her own worth. Eliza looked down at her own flour-dusted apron, her work-roughened hands, her plain dress worn thin from washing. The contrast was devastating. "Miss Eliza?" Jesse's voice was worried. "You all right?" "Fine," she lied. "Thank you for telling me." After Jesse left, Eliza stood frozen at the window, watching as Dawson emerged from the barn, watching as the beautiful woman turned toward him with a brilliant smile, watching as she crossed the yard with her arms outstretched. "Dawson, darling, it's been so long." Even from 50 yards away, Eliza could hear the cultured Eastern accent, the warmth and familiarity in that voice. She watched Dawson stop short, watched his face go carefully blank in that way he had when he was processing something unexpected. She watched the woman, Lillian, reach him and place her gloved hands on his arms like she had every right to touch him. And she watched something inside herself begin to crack. Because this was the truth she'd been avoiding. She was still just Eliza Hartwell, still the unwanted woman from Coldwater, still someone who could be replaced by someone better, prettier, more refined, still someone who didn't really belong. She turned away from the window and returned to her bread dough, kneading it with mechanical precision while her world quietly fell apart. An hour later, Dawson appeared in the cookhouse doorway. He looked exhausted, angry, confused, all of it playing across his face in ways he usually kept hidden. "Eliza?" You have a guest, she said, keeping her voice level. You should attend to her. I need to explain. You don't owe me explanations. She shaped the dough into loaves with steady hands. Your personal business is your own. The hell it is. He crossed to her, caught her wrist gently. Eliza, look at me. She didn't want him to see what was in her eyes, but she looked anyway because she'd never been good at protecting herself. Lillian Voss was my fiancée, he said bluntly, 10 years ago in Philadelphia. We were engaged for 6 months before I broke it off and came west. Why did you break it off? Because I realized she didn't love me. She loved what I could give her, status, security, a comfortable life. When I told her I wanted to build something out here, start fresh, she laughed. His voice hardened. Said only failures and fools went west. Said if I left, she'd never take me back. And now she's here. Now she's here, and I don't know why. His grip on her wrist tightened. But I know it doesn't change anything between us. Doesn't it? Eliza pulled free gently. Dawson, look at her. Look at me. See the difference? I see a woman who abandoned me when things got hard, and a woman who stayed when things got harder. That's the only difference that matters. Eliza wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly her chest ached with it, but she'd spent too many years being the woman people looked past to believe she could compete with someone like Lillian Voss. You should go, she said quietly. Your guest is waiting. Dawson looked like he wanted to argue, like he wanted to stay and make her understand something she couldn't quite grasp. But duty called, and he was too much a gentleman to ignore a guest, even an unwanted one. This isn't over, he said. Then he was gone, and Eliza was alone with her bread dough and the terrible certainty that everything was about to change. That evening, Lillian Voss came to dinner. She swept into the cookhouse like a force of nature dressed in silk and perfume. The men, who'd been settling into their usual evening routine, fell silent as Lillian Voss paused in the doorway. Her traveling dress had been replaced by something even more elaborate, deep green velvet that hugged her figure and made her skin glow like porcelain in the lamplight. Her golden hair was arranged in perfect ringlets, and diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. She looked around the rough wooden room with the kind of polite interest someone might show a museum exhibit of primitive living conditions. How charming, she said, her voice carrying that cultured Eastern accent that made everything sound slightly condescending. Dawson, darling, you've created quite the authentic frontier experience here. Dawson stood beside her, his face carefully neutral. The men eat here, 3 times a day. Of course they do. Where else would they eat? Lillian's laugh was like crystal bells, beautiful and cold. Her eyes found Eliza behind the serving counter. And you must be the cook. How delightful. Eliza felt every eye in the room turn toward her. She straightened her spine and met Lillian's gaze directly. I am. Dinner will be served shortly. I'm sure it will be perfectly adequate. Lillian's smile didn't reach her eyes. Dawson has told me so much about the improvements you've made. He's quite impressed with your rustic cooking skills. The word rustic landed like a slap, and they both knew it. Flint cleared his throat loudly. Miss Eliza's the best cook in the territory. We're lucky to have her. How loyal. Lillian's tone suggested loyalty was a quaint but ultimately meaningless virtue. I'm sure she does very well with what she has to work with. The condescension was subtle enough to be deniable, but obvious enough to wound. Eliza felt it settle in her chest like a cold stone. Please, sit wherever you'd like, she said evenly. Dinner is ready. She'd made pot roast with vegetables, biscuits, and apple cobbler for dessert. Good, solid food that had earned her the respect of every man in this room. Food she was proud of. But as she watched Lillian take a delicate seat at the table, carefully arranging her skirts to avoid touching anything too closely, that pride wavered. The men filled the room with their usual noise, but there was a tension underneath it. They kept glancing between Lillian, Dawson, and Eliza like spectators at a prize fight waiting for the first punch. Eliza served the meal with mechanical efficiency, avoiding eye contact with everyone. When she placed a plate in front of Lillian, the woman studied it like it might contain something dangerous. How hearty, she said. I'm sure the men need substantial fare after their labors. We work hard. We eat hard, Flint said, already digging into his meal. Miss Eliza feeds us like kings. Kings, Lillian repeated, her smile sharp. How provincial. Dawson had been silent through all of this, but now he spoke. Lillian, that's enough. Enough of what, darling? I'm simply making conversation. She turned her attention back to Eliza. Tell me, dear, how did you come to work here? It must be quite the adventure for someone of your background. The pause before background was deliberate, an invitation for Eliza to explain herself, to justify her presence, to acknowledge the vast gulf between them. Eliza could feel the men waiting for her response, could feel Dawson's eyes on her, could feel the weight of everything that had happened between them pressing down on this moment. Mr. Cole offered me a position, she said quietly. I accepted. How fortunate for you. Lillian took a tiny bite of pot roast, chewed thoughtfully, and set down her fork. It's very tender, almost too tender. The meat quite falls apart. It was meant as criticism disguised as observation, the kind of subtle knife work that women like Lillian had perfected in drawing rooms and social gatherings where overt cruelty was beneath them, but calculated undermining was an art form. That's the point, Jessie said hotly. It's supposed to be tender. Of course it is. Lillian's smile was indulgent. I'm sure it's exactly what's expected in a setting like this. The message was clear. Eliza's cooking was fine for cowboys and rough men, but it would never measure up to the standards of someone who dined in Philadelphia society. Eliza excused herself and retreated to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she gripped the edge of the wash basin. She could hear the murmur of conversation continuing without her, Lillian's bright laughter cutting through the deeper rumble of male voices. This was what she'd feared from the beginning, that someone would arrive who made her realize she'd been playing at something she had no right to claim, that the brief happiness she'd found would be revealed as temporary, a pleasant interlude before reality reasserted itself. She'd been the unwanted woman in cold water. Now she was the unwanted woman at Cole Ranch, made obsolete by someone better, prettier, more refined. Don't let her get to you. Eliza turned to find Flint in the doorway, his scarred face hard with anger. I'm fine, she said. You're not, and you shouldn't be. He crossed to her, lowering his voice. That woman is poison. She's here to take something from you, and she's using every weapon she's got. She doesn't need weapons. She's already won. The hell she has. Flint's hand came down on her shoulder. You listen to me, Eliza Hartwell. You've earned your place here, earned our respect, earned Dawson's. He stopped, reconsidered. You've earned everything you have. Don't you dare let some fancy Eastern woman make you forget that. Look at her, Flint, then look at me. See the difference? I see a woman who abandoned Dawson when he needed her, and a woman who stayed when things got hard. That's the only difference that matters. The words echoed what Dawson had said earlier, but they couldn't quite penetrate the armor of self-doubt that had settled around Eliza's heart. She returned to the dining room to serve dessert. The apple cobbler was still warm, the crust golden and flaky, the filling sweet and tart in perfect balance. She'd made it with the last of the preserved apples, and it was one of her best dishes. Lillian took one bite and set down her spoon. Apple cobbler. How rustic. She turned to Dawson with a smile that was somehow both intimate and excluding. Do you remember the tarte tatin we had at Delmonico's? The pastry chef there had trained in Paris. It quite ruined me for ordinary apple desserts. Dawson's jaw tightened. I remember you spent more time photographing the restaurant than eating the food. I was documenting our courtship. Lillian's hand reached across the table to touch his. All those beautiful moments we shared. I've kept every photograph, you know. Sometimes I look at them and wonder what might have been if you hadn't run away to chase this frontier fantasy. I didn't run away. I chose a different life. And what a life it is, Lillian gestured around the rough cookhouse. Eating in a shed with ranch hands, so very different from the future we planned together. The men had stopped eating. Every one of them was watching this exchange with varying degrees of anger and discomfort. Thomas stood abruptly. Miss Eliza's cobbler is the best I've ever had. Better than anything I ate back home, and my grandmother won prizes for her baking. How sweet, Lillian said. Though I suspect your grandmother didn't have much competition in, where was it you're from? Some small town in Kansas? Nebraska, Thomas said tightly. And she had plenty of competition. She just happened to be the best. I'm sure she was. Lillian's dismissal was complete. She turned back to Dawson. I'm feeling rather tired from the journey. Perhaps you could walk me back to the house. It wasn't a request. It was a command dressed in silk. Dawson looked at Eliza. She could see the conflict in his eyes, duty warring with desire, social obligation battling personal preference. Of course, he said finally. Gentlemen, enjoy your dessert. He offered Lillian his arm, and she took it with the proprietary grace of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. As they left, she glanced back at Eliza with a smile that said everything she'd left unsaid. I win. The door closed behind them, and the cookhouse erupted. That woman is a snake, Dutch declared. Snake's an insult to snakes, Flint added. At least snakes are honest about what they are. Did you see how she touched him? Jessie's young face was flushed with anger. Like she owned him. Maybe she does. The words came out of Eliza's mouth before she could stop them. Maybe she has more right to him than I ever did. That's horse shit and you know it, Flint said bluntly. Boss chose you. He didn't invite her here. She showed up uninvited and is trying to stake a claim on something that's not hers anymore. How do you know it's not hers? Eliza's voice cracked. They were engaged. They have history. They come from the same world. I'm just the cook. You're not just anything, Thomas said fiercely. You're Miss Eliza. You're the person who makes this place feel like home. You're the person who doesn't belong, Eliza finished. I've always known that. I just let myself forget for a while. She turned away before they could see her eyes fill with tears. The men tried to argue, but she couldn't hear them anymore. Couldn't hear anything past the roaring in her ears and the crushing weight of certainty settling over her. She'd been a fool to believe she could have this. A fool to think a man like Dawson Cole would choose her over someone like Lillian Voss. A fool to hope. That night, Eliza lay in her small bed and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Through her window, she could see the lights still burning in the main house. Could imagine Dawson and Lillian inside, talking about old times, remembering their shared past, perhaps even rekindling what had once been between them. The image was torture, but she couldn't stop creating it. Because that was what Eliza had learned in Coldwater. That torture was familiar. That disappointment was expected. That happiness was temporary and pain was permanent. She'd been briefly happy here. That would have to be enough. The storm came 3 days later, and with it, everything changed. Eliza had spent those 3 days in a state of mechanical functionality. She cooked, she cleaned, she served meals with quiet efficiency. But the life had gone out of her, and everyone could see it. The men tried to cheer her up. Dutch brought her flowers, the last hardy blooms he could find before winter killed everything. Thomas helped with dishes without being asked. Jessie tried to make her laugh with stories about a horse that had learned to open the feed room door. None of it worked. Lillian had taken up residence in the main house and made it her personal mission to remind everyone that she and Dawson had a history. She appeared at every meal, always perfectly dressed, always with a story about their shared past. Do you remember the opera, darling, La Traviata, at the Academy of Music? You look so handsome in your evening clothes. We should tell them about the yacht party on the Delaware. The Hendersons' yacht was nearly as large as their estate. Your mother's garden parties were legendary. Do you still have her recipes for lavender lemonade? I've been trying to recreate it for years. Each reminiscence was a tiny knife, carefully placed. Each memory was a reminder that they'd lived in a world Eliza could never access, had shared experiences she could never understand. Dawson grew quieter with each passing day. He stopped coming to the cookhouse during off hours, stopped seeking Eliza out. The few times their eyes met, she saw frustration and something that looked like helplessness. But he didn't send Lillian away, and that, more than anything, told Eliza everything she needed to know. Then the blizzard warning started. Big one coming, Flint announced at breakfast on the third day. Sky's got that look. We need to move the cattle to lower ground and secure everything that can blow away. Dawson nodded grimly. All hands. We move fast and we move smart. This isn't like the last storm. This one's going to be worse. The men scattered to their tasks. Lillian, who'd been sitting at Dawson's side with her morning tea, made a face. Surely you're not going out in this weather. It looks dreadful. This is what I do, Lillian. This is what running a ranch means. Then let your men handle it. That's what you pay them for. Her hand touched his arm. Stay inside where it's warm, where it's safe. For a moment, Eliza thought he might actually consider it, thought he might choose Lillian's comfort over his responsibilities. But Dawson stood, gently removing Lillian's hand. I don't ask my men to do anything I won't do myself. That's not how I run things. Something cold flashed across Lillian's perfect features. Yes, I'm beginning to remember that about you. The temperature dropped throughout the day. By noon, the wind was howling like something alive and angry. By 2, the snow had started, thick, wet flakes that accumulated faster than seemed possible. Eliza worked steadily through the afternoon, preparing food that would last if they got snowed in. Hot soup, fresh bread, stew that could be reheated. She knew the drill from the last storm, but this time there was no excitement in the preparation, only grim determination. The men started coming in around 4, covered in snow and ice, their faces raw from wind exposure. Lost 6 head in the north pasture, Flint reported, his voice hoarse. Broke through the ice on the creek. Nothing we could do. More men straggled in, each with similar stories. Cattle lost. Fences down. Equipment damaged or destroyed. By 5, everyone was accounted for except 3 men. Where's Dawson? Eliza asked, keeping her voice level despite the fear rising in her throat. Still out with Davies and Hutchins, Jesse said, his young face tight with worry. They were moving the last of the herd when we lost sight of them. In this? Eliza moved to the window, but visibility was nearly 0. They need to come in. Boss won't leave cattle behind if he can help it, Flint said grimly. You know that. She did know. Knew that Dawson would risk himself before he'd abandon an animal or a man to the storm. Knew that his sense of responsibility ran deeper than self-preservation. It was one of the things she loved about him. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She loved him, loved his roughness and his honor, loved the way he saw her as worth something, loved the quiet strength he brought to everything he did. She loved him, and he was out there in a killer storm. The minutes crawled past. The men ate in tense silence, checking the windows, watching for any sign of movement. Lillian had come down from the main house, wrapped in furs, her face pinched with cold and irritation. This is absurd, she declared. They're just cows. Surely Dawson wouldn't risk his life over livestock. You don't know him at all, do you? The words came out of Eliza before she could stop them. Lillian's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? If you knew him, you'd know he'd risk himself for anything on this ranch. Animals, men, the land itself. Eliza met her gaze steadily. Because that's who he is. That's what matters to him. And you think you know him better than I do? I knew him for years before he came to this forsaken place. You knew who he was trying to be. I know who he actually is. The room had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Lillian's beautiful face twisted into something ugly. You presumptuous little... The door burst open. 3 snow-covered figures stumbled inside, and Eliza's heart leaped as she recognized Dawson's broad frame. But something was wrong. He was supporting Davies, who was limping badly, and Hutchins was carrying something wrapped in Dawson's coat. What happened? Flint demanded, already moving to help. Davies fell through the ice, Dawson said, his voice rough from shouting over the wind. Got him out, but he's hypothermic. Need blankets and hot water. The men moved into action, but Eliza was faster. She had blankets ready, had kept water hot for exactly this kind of emergency. Get him by the stove, she ordered. Strip off the wet clothes. Flint, help me. They worked together with practiced efficiency, warming Davies slowly, getting hot liquid into him, wrapping him in layers of dry wool, but it was the bundle in Hutchins' arms that caught everyone's attention. What is that? Jesse asked. Hutchins carefully unwrapped Dawson's coat to reveal a child, a girl, maybe 6 years old, unconscious and blue-lipped with cold. The room erupted in shocked questions. Found her near the creek, Dawson said, kneeling beside the child. Must have wandered from one of the homesteads. Don't know how long she was out there. She's barely breathing, Hutchins said, fear stark in his eyes. Eliza didn't think. She simply moved, years of watching her mother tend the sick and injured taking over. Bring her here, by the stove. Thomas, get more blankets. Jesse, hot water bottles, wrap them in cloth so they don't burn. Dutch, I need that brandy from the medical supplies. She took the child from Hutchins, and her heart clenched at how small and fragile the girl felt. How cold. Come on, sweetheart, she murmured, stripping away the wet, frozen clothes with gentle efficiency. Come back to us. You're safe now. She worked steadily, warming the child's core first, then her extremities, rubbed her hands and feet to restore circulation, wrapped her in layers of wool and positioned her close to the stove's heat. The men watched in silence, even Lillian forgotten, as everyone focused on the small, still figure. Minutes passed. The child didn't respond. Eliza, Dawson said quietly. There was something terrible in his voice, the sound of hope dying. No. Eliza refused to accept it. She'd lost too many things in her life. She wouldn't lose this child. Come on, baby. Breathe for me. Please. She pulled the girl into her arms, holding her close, sharing her body heat, whispering encouragement and prayers and desperate pleas. And then, finally, a shudder ran through the small body. A cough. A gasp. Eyes fluttering open, confused and frightened but alive. There you are, Eliza whispered, tears streaming down her face. There you are. The child started crying, weak, broken sobs, and Eliza held her tighter, rocking her gently. You're safe. I've got you. You're going to be fine. The cookhouse erupted in relieved cheers. Men who'd faced down blizzards and stampedes without flinching wiped tears from their weathered faces. Dawson knelt beside Eliza, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. You saved her, he said, roughly. She was gone, and you brought her back. Eliza looked up at him through her tears. We saved her, all of us. But it was her arms the child clung to, her voice that soothed the frightened sobs, her warmth that had coaxed life back into that small, frozen body. For the next hour, Eliza didn't leave the child's side. She fed her warm broth in tiny sips, kept her wrapped and warm, sang soft songs in a voice rough from disuse. The men worked around her, tending to Davies, securing the cookhouse against the storm, preparing for a long night. Lillian stood apart, watching with an expression that was part disgust, part jealousy, part something else entirely. When the child finally fell into an exhausted sleep, Eliza looked up to find every eye in the room on her. Her name's Sarah, Dawson said quietly. Davies recognized her. Homestead about 3 miles south. Family named Peterson. Father died last month. Mother's been trying to run the place alone. She must be out of her mind with worry, Eliza said. Can't get word to her till the storm breaks. But we'll keep the girl safe till then. Dawson's eyes met hers. Thanks to you. Anyone would have done the same. No. His voice was firm. Not anyone. You knew what to do. You didn't panic. You fought for her. He paused. You've got the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Lillian made a small, disgusted sound. How touching. The cook plays hero. The men turned toward her as one, their faces hard. That's enough, Dawson said, his voice cold. Is it? Because I've been watching this little performance, and I'm rather tired of pretending to be impressed. Lillian's beautiful features twisted with spite. The noble frontier woman, sacrificing herself for the helpless. It's all very dramatic. Get out, Flint said quietly. I beg your pardon? You heard me. Get out of this cookhouse. You're not welcome here. Lillian laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. You can't order me around. This is Dawson's ranch, and I'm his guest. And this is Miss Eliza's cookhouse, Thomas said, standing. And you're insulting her. That's not allowed. One by one, the men stood, a wall of rough, hard men who'd found something worth protecting. Lillian looked at Dawson, clearly expecting him to defend her, to put his men in their place, to choose her over this crude display of loyalty. Dawson stood slowly. When he spoke, his voice was colder than the blizzard outside. They're right. You need to leave. Shock flashed across Lillian's face. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. He crossed to her, his expression hard. You came here uninvited. You've spent 3 days insulting my home, my men, and the woman I... He stopped, then continued. You've overstayed your welcome. The woman you what, Dawson? Lillian's eyes glittered with malice. The woman you what? Love? This plain common cook? This nobody from nowhere? The woman worth 10 of you, Dawson said flatly. Now, get out before I have you escorted. For a moment, Lillian looked like she might argue. Then her face hardened into something cruel and calculating. You'll regret this, she said, when you're stuck out here in the middle of nowhere with your cattle and your rough men and your simple cook. You'll remember what you gave up. You'll remember the life we could have had. I already remember what you gave up, Dawson said. Me. When I needed you to believe in something bigger than comfort and status. You chose your easy life over everything we could have built together. And now you're building it with her? Lillian's laugh was ugly. How romantic. How pathetic. She's not your equal, Dawson. She never will be. You're right. Dawson's voice was steady. She's better than me. Braver, stronger, more loyal. He looked at Eliza, and something in his expression made her breath catch. She stayed when you ran. She fought when you quit. She's everything you're not. Lillian's face went white with rage. You'll die alone out here, you and your little cook and your pathetic frontier dream. And I'll be in Philadelphia, living the life you were too much a coward to claim. Then I guess we both got what we wanted, Dawson said. The door's that way. Lillian gathered her furs around her like armor and swept toward the exit. At the door, she turned back one last time. She'll never be enough for you, she said viciously. And deep down, you know it. Then she was gone, the door slamming behind her with a finality that echoed through the sudden silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Dawson crossed to Eliza, who was still sitting on the floor with the sleeping child in her arms. He knelt beside her, his rough hand gentle as he touched her face. She's wrong, he said quietly. You're more than enough. You're everything. Eliza couldn't speak past the tears choking her throat, couldn't do anything but lean into his touch and hold the child who'd brought them to this moment. Around them, the men quietly dispersed, giving them privacy, giving them space, giving them the moment they both desperately needed. The blizzard raged outside. But inside the cookhouse, something had shifted. Something fundamental and permanent. Eliza had spent her life being told she wasn't enough, wasn't pretty enough, refined enough, worthy enough. But in this moment, held by Dawson's eyes and surrounded by the respect of 20 rough men, she finally understood the truth. She'd never needed to be what other people expected. She'd only needed to be exactly who she was, strong and brave and loyal and true. And that, finally, was enough. The child slept through the night in Eliza's arms, small fingers clutching the fabric of her dress even in sleep. Eliza dozed fitfully in the chair by the stove, unwilling to move and risk waking the girl, her back aching and her neck stiff, but her heart strangely full. Dawson had stayed too, stretched out on the floor nearby with his coat for a pillow, refusing to leave until he was certain both the child and Davies were stable. The other men had retreated to the bunkhouse hours ago, but the cookhouse felt less empty with him there, his quiet breathing a counterpoint to the howling wind outside. When dawn finally broke, pale and gray through the frost-covered windows, Sarah stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, confusion giving way to fear when she didn't recognize her surroundings. Shh. It's all right, Eliza murmured, her voice hoarse from the cold air. You're safe. You're at Cole Ranch. Mama? The word came out small and broken. We'll get you home to her as soon as the storm clears. I promise. Eliza smoothed the child's tangled hair. Are you hungry? Sarah nodded, and Eliza felt relief flood through her. Hunger was a good sign. Hunger meant recovery. She carried the girl to the kitchen, wrapped in blankets, and settled her on a stool while she prepared a simple breakfast. Warm oatmeal with honey and cream, toast with butter, weak tea sweetened with sugar. Dawson appeared in the doorway, his hair disheveled and his face shadowed with exhaustion. His eyes went immediately to Sarah, then to Eliza, and something softened in his expression. How is she? Eating. That's a good sign. Eliza spooned oatmeal into a bowl. Davies? Awake and complaining about his foot. Also a good sign. He moved closer, watching as Sarah took careful bites. Storm's letting up, should be able to get word to her mother by noon. She must be frantic. Flint's already saddling up. He'll ride out as soon as there's enough visibility. Dawson's voice dropped lower. What you did last night was what anyone would do. No. His hand found hers on the counter, calloused fingers gentle against her rougher ones. What you did was remarkable. You didn't hesitate, didn't panic. You just fought for her like she was your own. Eliza looked down at their joined hands, her throat tight. I couldn't lose her. I've lost too much already. I know. His thumb traced circles on her wrist. But you didn't lose her. You saved her. And in doing that, he stopped, struggling for words. You reminded me what matters. What's real. Before Eliza could respond, Sarah tugged on her sleeve. Can I have more toast? The moment broke, but its echo lingered as Eliza busied herself with cutting more bread, buttering it carefully while Dawson watched from across the room. The storm cleared by midday, leaving the world transformed. Snow lay in deep drifts against the buildings, brilliant white under a sky scrubbed clean and impossibly blue. The men emerged from the bunkhouse like survivors from a siege, squinting against the brightness, already assessing the damage. Flint returned 2 hours later with a woman who looked like she'd aged 10 years in a single night. Margaret Peterson was thin and worn, her hands rough from work, and her face etched with the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying burdens too heavy for one person. When she saw Sarah, safe and warm in the cookhouse, she broke. My baby, she sobbed, falling to her knees and pulling the child into her arms. My sweet baby, I thought... I'm sorry, Mama, Sarah said, crying too. I went looking for patches and got lost, and it was so cold. Hush now, you're safe. That's all that matters. Margaret looked up at Eliza through her tears. Thank you. They told me what you did, how you saved her. I don't have words. You don't need words. Eliza knelt beside them. I'm just glad we found her in time. We would have lost everything if... Margaret's voice broke. She's all I have left. After John died, she's all I have. The grief in those words was raw and familiar. Eliza knew what it was to lose everything, knew what it was to have nothing left but the determination to keep breathing. How are you managing? She asked quietly. With the homestead? I'm not. Margaret's laugh was bitter. The cattle are dying. The roof needs repair. I can barely keep us fed, let alone maintain the property. But I can't leave. It's all we have. John worked himself to death for that land. Eliza glanced at Dawson, who'd been standing by the window listening. He met her eyes, and she saw her own thoughts reflected there. Mrs. Peterson, he said, moving forward, I might have a proposition for you. Over the next hour, while Sarah dozed by the stove and the men worked outside clearing snow, Dawson outlined a plan. He'd buy Margaret's cattle at a fair price, better than fair actually, which would give her immediate cash. In return, she and Sarah could stay in one of the ranch cottages through the winter while she decided what to do with the homestead. I can't accept charity, Margaret said stiffly. It's not charity, it's business. Dawson's voice was firm but kind. Your cattle are worth something to me, and that cottage is sitting empty. Seems foolish to waste resources when we've got them. And in the spring? Margaret's eyes were wary. What then? In the spring, you make your own choice. Keep the homestead and try again. Sell it and move on. Stay here and work. We could use someone good with livestock. And Flint tells me you know your way around cattle. He paused. Or something else entirely. Your choice. Margaret looked at her daughter, then at the cookhouse around them, warm and solid and safe. Why would you do this for us? We're nothing to you. You're neighbors. That makes you something. Dawson glanced at Eliza. And I've learned recently that sometimes the right thing to do isn't the practical thing. It's just the right thing. Margaret was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded, tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. Thank you, she whispered. You don't know what this means. But watching Margaret hold her daughter close, Eliza thought she understood perfectly. After they'd gone, settled into the cottage with promises of hot meals and whatever help they needed, Eliza and Dawson stood alone in the cookhouse for the first time since Lillian had left. The silence between them felt heavy with unspoken things. "That was good, what you did for them," Eliza said finally. "Seemed like the right call." Dawson moved closer. "Besides, I had a good example to follow. Someone who showed me that sometimes the most important thing is just showing up for people when they need you. I didn't do anything special. You saved a child's life. You stood up to Lillian. You've been holding this whole place together for months while I was too blind to see it." His voice roughened. "You're the strongest person I know, Eliza Hartwell, and I've been a coward." "You're not." "I am. I've been afraid to tell you what you mean to me. Afraid that if I said it out loud, something would go wrong. That you'd realize you deserved better than a rough rancher who doesn't know how to talk about feelings." He took her hands in his. "But last night, watching Lillian try to tear you down, watching you save that child despite being exhausted and hurting, I realized being afraid is stupider than any words I could stumble over." Eliza's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over it. "Dawson, I love you." The words came out rough and honest. "I love your strength and your kindness and the way you make this place feel like home. I love that you don't back down when things get hard. I love how you see people, really see them, and give them what they need without them having to ask. I love—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I love everything about you. And I know I'm not good with words, and I know I'm asking a lot, but—" Eliza kissed him. It was the only way to stop the flow of words, the only way to show him that he didn't need to convince her of anything, that she'd been convinced the moment he'd defended her to Lillian, the moment he'd chosen her over comfort and history and every easy option. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Dawson rested his forehead against hers. "Does that mean—" "I love you too," Eliza whispered. "I think I have for weeks. I was just too scared to admit it." "Scared of what?" "Of being wrong. Of being a fool. Of wanting something so much and having it taken away." Her voice cracked. "I've spent my whole life being told I'm not enough. Not pretty enough. Not refined enough. Not worthy of being chosen. And when Lillian showed up, everything I'd been afraid of seemed to be coming true. She was wrong about you." Dawson's hands came up to frame her face. "You're more than enough. You're everything, and anyone who can't see that is blind. Your men see it, because they're smart enough to recognize quality when they find it." He smiled, and it transformed his harsh features into something almost boyish. "Marry me." Eliza's breath caught. "What?" "Marry me. Be my partner in this ranch, in this life. Let me spend every day proving to you that you're exactly what I need." His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "I know it's fast. I know we should probably wait, do this proper. But I'm tired of waiting for good things. I'm tired of being cautious. I want to build a life with you, Eliza, starting now." Joy and terror warred in Eliza's chest. "The men already approve. Trust me, they've been making jokes about it for weeks. The town can think whatever they want. I don't care about the town. I care about you." Eliza looked at him, this hard, honest man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd defended her against cruelty, who'd seen past the surface everyone else couldn't get beyond. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Dawson kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no fear, just certainty and joy and the promise of something real. They were still standing there, wrapped in each other, when the cookhouse door burst open and Jesse tumbled in. "Boss, we've got—" "Oh." He stopped short, his young face splitting into a grin. "Oh, sorry. I can come back." "What is it, Jesse?" Dawson didn't let go of Eliza. "It's Davies. He's running a fever, pretty high." Jesse's grin faded. "Flint says we might need to get him to a doctor." Eliza pulled away immediately, her mind already racing through what she knew about fevers and infections. "How high?" "Don't know exactly, but he's talking out of his head, and his leg where he got frostbite is swollen." "Infection," Dawson said grimly. "Damn. All right, let me see him." They followed Jesse to the bunkhouse, where Davies lay on his cot, face flushed and eyes glassy. His left leg was indeed swollen, the skin around his frostbitten toes angry red. Eliza knelt beside him, touching his forehead. Hot, too hot. "We need to get the fever down and clean that infection," she said. "Do we have any whiskey?" "For drinking or for cleaning?" Flint asked. "Both. And I need clean cloth, hot water, and someone to ride to town for the doctor." The men moved into action, but Eliza could see the worry in their faces. Davies was well liked, and the nearest doctor was hours away, even in good conditions. With the snow still deep on the roads, it could take all day. She spent the next hours fighting for Davies' life the way she'd fought for Sarah's. Cleaning the infected tissue with whiskey that made him scream even in his delirium. Packing the wounds with clean cloth. Forcing water and willow bark tea down his throat to fight the fever. Dawson stayed beside her, following her instructions without question, trusting her judgment the way he'd trust a doctor's. As the day wore on, more men started showing symptoms. Not frostbite, they'd all been too careful for that, but the kind of deep cold that settled into lungs and throats and turned into something worse. Thomas developed a cough that rattled his chest. Dutch ran a low fever. Even Flint admitted his throat felt like he'd swallowed glass. "Pneumonia," Eliza said grimly. "We're close to it. The cold, the exhaustion, the exposure, it's catching up with them." "What do we do?" Dawson asked. "Keep them warm, keep them hydrated. Make sure they rest and eat." She looked around at the 20 men who'd become her family. "And pray this doesn't get worse." But it did get worse. By nightfall, half the men were sick. By the next morning, 3/4. The cookhouse became a makeshift hospital, with pallets laid out on the floor, and Eliza moving between them like a battlefield medic. She made endless pots of soup and tea, changed cold compresses, listened to labored breathing, and tried not to let her fear show. The doctor had arrived late the previous night, an elderly man named Harrison who took one look at the situation and shook his head. "You've got a full-blown outbreak here," he said. "Best thing you can do is exactly what you're doing. Keep them comfortable, keep their fevers down. Some of them will pull through. He didn't finish the sentence. Some wouldn't. That was what he meant. Eliza refused to accept it. She worked through the night, snatching sleep in 15-minute increments, forcing herself to eat only when Dawson physically put food in her hands. Her eyes burned with exhaustion. Her hands shook from fatigue. But she kept moving, kept fighting, kept refusing to let anyone slip away. Davies was the worst. His fever spiked and broke and spiked again. His infected leg turned colors that made Dr. Harrison mention amputation in a quiet voice that Eliza pretended not to hear. "No," she said firmly. "We're not cutting off his leg. Not yet." "Miss Hartwell, I understand your reluctance, but—" "I said no." She met his eyes. "Give me 2 more days. If it's not better by then, we'll discuss it, but not before." Dr. Harrison looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her face stopped him. 2 days, but no longer. Eliza barely left Davies' side after that. She changed his dressings every few hours, cleaned the wounds with solutions doctor. Harrison had packed them with poultices made from herbs she'd learned about from her mother. She talked to him too, even when he couldn't hear her. Told him about the ranch, about the men who were worried about him, about the spring that was coming and all the work that would need doing. "You can't give up," she said fiercely, wringing out another cold cloth for his forehead. "You hear me, Davies? You fought too hard to survive that blizzard to die now. Your body just needs time to remember how to heal." On the second night, when his fever finally broke for good and his eyes opened clear for the first time in days, she cried. "Miss Eliza?" His voice was weak but coherent. "What happened?" "You scared us half to death. That's what happened." She squeezed his hand. "But you're going to be fine now. Your leg, too." "My leg?" He tried to sit up, panic flashing across his face. "Still attached, still functional. Dr. Harrison wanted to cut it off, but I told him no." Davies stared at her for a long moment, then his eyes filled with tears. "You saved my life. You would have done the same for me. No, I mean it. I would have lost my leg, probably my life, but you—" His voice broke. "Thank you." Eliza helped him drink some water, then moved on to the next patient. There was no time for sentimentality, no time for anything except the work. But one by one, the men recovered. The fevers broke. The coughs eased. Color returned to faces that had been gray with illness. It took 2 weeks of constant vigilance, 2 weeks of Eliza barely sleeping, barely eating, pushing herself past every reasonable limit. And then, finally, it was over. The last man, young Jesse, who'd fought a lung infection that had terrified everyone, sat up one morning and asked for bacon. "Bacon?" Eliza repeated, so exhausted she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. "Yes, ma'am. I'm starving. Can I have bacon and eggs and maybe some of those biscuits you make?" Eliza started laughing. Couldn't stop. Laughed until tears ran down her face and her sides ached, and Jessie was looking at her like she'd lost her mind. "What's so funny?" he asked. "Nothing. Everything." She wiped her eyes. "You can have all the bacon you want, and biscuits, and anything else your heart desires." She made them all a feast that day, the first real meal in 2 weeks. Bacon and eggs and biscuits and fried potatoes and gravy and fresh bread and apple pie made from the last of the preserves. The men ate like they'd never seen food before, and watching them, healthy and whole and alive, Eliza felt something inside her finally release. She'd done it, kept them all alive through the worst outbreak the ranch had ever seen, lost not a single man to illness or infection or amputation. After the meal, as the men returned to their bunks to rest properly for the first time in weeks, Dawson found her in the kitchen. She was standing at the sink, hands braced on the counter, head bowed with exhaustion so profound it felt like gravity had tripled. "Eliza!" She didn't turn around, couldn't. If she moved, she'd collapse. His arms came around her from behind, strong and steady, and she leaned back into him gratefully. "You need to rest," he said into her hair. "I need to clean up. Make sure everyone has what they need for the night. Plan tomorrow's meals." "No." His voice was firm. "You need to rest. The men are fine. The cookhouse will still be here in the morning. You've been running on determination and coffee for 2 weeks. That's over now." "But, no buts." He turned her around gently, and what she saw in his face made her throat tighten. Pride. Love. Something that looked like awe. "You just saved 20 men's lives, Eliza. Davies would have lost his leg and probably died without you. Half the crew would have developed pneumonia. Dr. Harrison said he's never seen anyone work the way you did, never seen anyone refuse to give up the way you refused." "I couldn't let them die," her voice cracked. "They're my family." "I know, and they know, and every single one of them would die for you now. You understand that? You didn't just earn their respect, you earned their devotion." He cupped her face in his hands. "You earned mine." "You already loved me. I already loved you. But now I've seen what you're capable of when everything's on the line. Seen how you fight, how you refuse to accept defeat, how you care for people like their lives matter more than your own comfort." His voice roughened. "You're the strongest person I've ever known, the bravest. And I don't deserve you, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to." Eliza kissed him, tasting salt from tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth. "I love you too. Now come on. You're going to bed." "I can't. There's too much." He lifted her off her feet, ignoring her weak protest, and carried her to her small room, set her on the bed and pulled off her boots with gentle efficiency. "Sleep," he ordered. "That's not a request. That's a direct order from your future husband." "Bossy," she mumbled, already half asleep. "Practical." He pulled a blanket over her. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to insist she had work to do, but exhaustion was a tide pulling her under, and for once, she let it. She slept for 16 hours straight. When she finally woke, the sun was high, and the cookhouse was full of the smell of coffee and bacon. She stumbled out of her room to find the men had taken over cooking duties, with predictably chaotic results. "We tried to make biscuits," Thomas said apologetically, showing her something that looked more like hockey pucks. "They didn't turn out right." "We figured out bacon, though," Jessie added proudly. "And coffee," Dutch said, "although it might be a little strong." Eliza looked at the burned biscuits, the overcooked bacon, the coffee thick enough to stand a spoon in, and felt her eyes fill with tears. "It's perfect," she said. "Thank you." They fed her breakfast, terrible biscuits and all, and told her they'd already planned the next week's menu and done the inventory and were prepared to handle meals until she was fully rested. "We figured it's the least we can do," Flint said, "since you saved all our sorry hides. I just did what needed doing." "No," Davies spoke from his cot in the corner, where he was still recovering but improving daily. "You did what no one else could have done. You fought for us when we couldn't fight for ourselves. That's not just doing what needs doing, that's being a hero." The other men murmured agreement, and Eliza felt her face heat. "I'm not a hero, I'm just a cook." "You're not just anything," Dawson said from the doorway. He'd been standing there watching, and now he moved forward with something in his hands. "And we wanted you to know how we feel." He held out a wooden box, beautifully carved with her initials. "The men made this. Well, Dutch did most of the carving, but everyone contributed something." Eliza opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a collection of small treasures: a smooth river stone from Jesse, a pressed wildflower from Thomas, a piece of polished bone carved into a tiny horse from Flint. Each man had contributed something, tokens of appreciation and affection. At the bottom was a piece of paper, signed by all 20 men. "We, the undersigned, do hereby declare that Eliza Hartwell is the finest cook, the bravest woman, and the best thing that ever happened to Cole Ranch. We are forever in her debt and will defend her honor and her right to be here against anyone who says otherwise." Eliza couldn't speak, could only clutch the box and the paper and let the tears fall. These rough men who'd mocked her on her first day, who'd tested her and judged her and made her prove herself. These men loved her. Not just respected, loved, and she loved them back. "Thank you," she finally managed. "All of you. Thank you. Thank you," they said in return. "For staying, for fighting, for making this place home." That night, after the men had returned to the bunkhouse and the cookhouse was quiet, Dawson and Eliza sat together by the stove. "When do you want to get married?" he asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Whenever you want." "Tomorrow?" She laughed. "That's fast." "I told you, I'm done being cautious. I want to marry you, build a life with you, start every day knowing you're mine and I'm yours." He kissed her temple. "So tomorrow, or next week, or whenever you say. Just say yes." "Yes," Eliza whispered. "Yes to tomorrow. Yes to building a life. Yes to everything." And sitting there in the warm cookhouse, surrounded by the smell of bread and coffee and home, Eliza Hartwell finally understood what it meant to belong. Not because someone had chosen her, but because she'd chosen herself. And in doing so, she'd found everything she'd stopped believing was possible. They were married 3 days later in the main room of the ranch house, with all 20 men standing witness and Margaret Peterson holding Sarah in her arms near the back. There was no fancy dress, no elaborate ceremony. Eliza wore the best dress she owned, a simple gray wool that she'd pressed carefully the night before. Dawson wore clean work clothes and had attempted to tame his hair, though it still stuck up in places that made Jesse grin. The circuit preacher happened to be passing through Coldwater, and Flint had ridden out to fetch him before Dawson could change his mind about waiting. "Not that you would," Flint had said with a knowing smile, "but figured we'd make it official before spring work starts. And you're too busy to remember you've got a woman waiting." The ceremony was brief. The preacher spoke about commitment and partnership, about building a life together in a harsh land, about the strength required to choose love when survival alone was hard enough. Eliza barely heard him. She was too focused on Dawson's hands holding hers, rough and warm and steady, too aware of the way he was looking at her, like she was the only person in the room, the only person who mattered. "Do you, Dawson Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." No hesitation, no doubt. "And do you, Eliza Hartwell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." The words came out strong and clear, and she felt something shift inside her chest, the final piece of armor she'd been carrying falling away. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Dawson kissed her like they were alone, like the 20 cowboys weren't watching with broad grins, like the preacher wasn't clearing his throat awkwardly. He kissed her like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment and wasn't going to waste a second of it. When they finally broke apart, the men erupted in cheers and whistles. "About damn time," Dutch called out. "Boss finally got smart," Thomas added. Flint just shook his head, His scarred face creased in what might have been the closest thing to a smile Eliza had ever seen from him. Congratulations, both of you. The celebration that followed was chaotic and heartfelt. The men had pooled their resources to buy supplies from town. Real sugar, good coffee, even a bottle of champagne that must have cost someone a week's wages. They'd decorated the ranch house with pine boughs and wildflowers that Margaret had somehow coaxed into blooming in her cottage window. Eliza had made a cake the night before, working by lamplight while Dawson pretended to sleep, but actually watched her from the doorway. It wasn't fancy, just a simple white cake with honey frosting. But when she cut into it and served pieces to everyone gathered, she saw grown men get misty-eyed over the gesture. "Never thought I'd see the boss married," Davies said, balancing carefully on his healing leg. "And definitely never thought he'd marry someone who actually makes him happy." "What did you think he'd marry?" Jessie asked. "A strong horse, maybe. A good rifle." Davies grinned. "Something practical." "Eliza is practical," Dawson said, his arm around her waist. "Most practical thing I ever did was convince her to stay." "You didn't have to convince me," Eliza said quietly. "I wanted to stay. Even when we tested you? Especially then. Because you tested me and I passed." She looked around at the men who'd become her family. "You made me prove I belonged. No one had ever given me that chance before." The room went quiet, the weight of her words settling over them. "Well," Flint said finally, raising his cup of champagne, "here's to second chances, and to the woman who made this ranch feel like home." "To Eliza," the men chorused. "To Mrs. Cole," Dawson corrected, and the way he said it, with pride and possessiveness and something that sounded like wonder, made Eliza's eyes burn with happy tears. The party lasted until well past midnight. The men told stories and sang songs that were only slightly off-key. Margaret taught Sarah a dance, and the little girl's laughter filled the room like music. Even Dr. Harrison, who'd stayed on to monitor Davy's recovery, allowed himself a glass of champagne and admitted this was the finest wedding he'd attended in 20 years of frontier practice. But eventually, the celebration wound down. The men retreated to the bunkhouse, calling out final congratulations and slightly bawdy advice that made Dawson tell them to shut up before Eliza heard. "I heard," she said, laughing, "and I'm not scandalized." "You should be. They're terrible. They're happy. For us." She leaned into him as they stood on the porch, watching the last of the guests disappear into the night. "I never thought I'd have this. This? People who care. A place that feels like home. Someone who—" She stopped, overwhelmed. "Someone who loves you?" Dawson finished. "Someone who thinks you're the best thing that ever happened to him? Someone who can't believe his luck?" "All of that." He kissed her forehead. "Get used to it, Mrs. Cole, because I plan on reminding you every day for the rest of our lives." They spent their wedding night in the main house, Dawson's house, which was now their house, in a bedroom that felt too large and too quiet after months of sleeping in the small room off the cookhouse. Eliza stood at the window, looking out at the valley silvered by moonlight, and felt the weight of everything that had changed. 4 months ago, she'd been alone in a cabin on the edge of Coldwater, invisible and unwanted. Now she was married to a man she loved, surrounded by people who valued her, living in a place that needed her. It felt impossible, like a dream she might wake from. Dawson's arms came around her from behind. "What are you thinking?" "That I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of losing this. Of waking up and finding out it wasn't real." He turned her to face him. "It's real. I'm real. This ranch is real. Those men out there who'd fight anyone who threatened you, they're real too." "I know, but I spent so many years believing I didn't deserve good things that it's hard to accept when they happen." "Then let me help you." His hands framed her face. "Let me spend every day proving this is real, that you're loved, that you belong." Eliza kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't say into the gesture. And when he lifted her and carried her to the bed they'd share for the rest of their lives, she finally let herself believe. This was real. This was hers. This was home. Spring came slowly to Wyoming that year, reluctant and cold. But when it finally arrived, it transformed the valley into something almost magical. Wildflowers burst from the ground in impossible profusion. Creeks swelled with snowmelt, running silver and loud. The cattle grew fat on new grass, and the horses shed their winter coats in great patches that caught on fence posts and blew across the yard like tumbleweeds. The ranch thrived. Under Dawson's management and Eliza's steady presence, Cole Ranch became something more than just a cattle operation. It became known throughout the territory as a place where people were treated fairly, where hard work was rewarded, where loyalty mattered more than lineage. Word spread about the cook who'd saved 20 men during the worst outbreak the region had seen, about the woman who'd nursed everyone through pneumonia without losing a single soul, about Eliza Cole, who proved that strength came in many forms. People started coming to the ranch, not just to buy cattle, but to meet the woman they'd heard about. Homesteaders looking for advice on surviving Wyoming winters. Women seeking recipes and medical knowledge. Even a few from Coldwater, curious about the woman they'd overlooked who'd become something of a frontier legend. Eliza welcomed them all with the same quiet grace she brought to everything else. She shared her recipes, her remedies, her hard-won wisdom about surviving in a harsh land. And slowly, the cookhouse became more than just a place to feed ranch hands. It became a gathering spot, a place of warmth and welcome in a territory that offered little of either. Margaret Peterson became a permanent fixture at the ranch. After much discussion, she'd sold her homestead to a family from Nebraska and accepted Dawson's offer to work with the cattle. She proved to have a natural gift for it, and within months she was managing a significant portion of the herd. Sarah attended the small school that had opened in Coldwater, riding there twice a week with Jesse, who'd taken on the role of protective older brother with endearing seriousness. "Someone's got to make sure she doesn't get picked on," he'd explained to Eliza. "Kids can be cruel." "Yes," Eliza had agreed, thinking of her own childhood. "They can be. Thank you for protecting her." The ranch added 2 more hands that spring, a pair of brothers from Colorado who'd heard about Cole Ranch and wanted to work somewhere they'd be treated with respect. Then 3 more in early summer. By fall, they had 30 men on the payroll, and Dawson was talking about expanding the bunkhouse. "We're going to need a bigger cookhouse too," he'd told Eliza one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "I can manage 30, she'd said. "For now. But we're going to keep growing, and you," he'd pulled her close. "You need help, real help, not just the men pitching in when they remember." "Are you saying my cooking is suffering?" She tried to sound offended, but the smile gave her away. "I'm saying my wife works too hard and deserves support." He'd kissed her temple. "What would you think about hiring an assistant, someone to help with prep and cleanup? Maybe eventually a second cook for the hands so you can focus on other things?" "What other things?" His hand had moved to rest on her still flat stomach. "Maybe future things." Eliza's breath had caught. They hadn't talked about children yet, though she thought about it sometimes. Wondered if she'd be a good mother. Wondered if a child raised on this ranch, surrounded by rough but loving men, would grow up strong and confident. Wondered if she'd be able to give a child the sense of belonging she'd never had. "Is that something you want?" she'd asked quietly. "Only if you do. I married you because I love you, Eliza, not because I needed a wife to give me children or run my household. You, just as you are, is enough." He'd paused. "But if you wanted children, if that's something you dreamed about, then yes, I'd want that too." "I don't know if I'd be a good mother." "Are you joking? You mother everyone on this ranch already. You take care of people like it's breathing. Any child of ours would be lucky to have you." The conversation had stayed with Eliza through the following weeks. She watched Margaret with Sarah, saw the easy affection between them, watched the men with the children who sometimes visited from neighboring ranches, surprised by their gentle patience. And she started to let herself imagine it. A child running through the cookhouse, stealing warm biscuits. A little one learning to ride under Dawson's careful supervision. A family that extended beyond just the 2 of them. It scared her, but it also felt right. The first frost came early that year in late September. Eliza woke to find the world transformed. Every blade of grass, every fence post, every surface covered in delicate white crystals that caught the dawn light and threw it back in rainbow prisms. She was standing at the window, marveling at it, when Dawson's arms came around her. "Beautiful," he murmured. "It's like the world put on diamonds." "I wasn't talking about the frost." He kissed her neck. "Though that's beautiful too." Eliza turned in his arms. They'd been married 6 months now, and she still sometimes couldn't believe this was her life. That she woke up every morning beside this man, that she had a place and a purpose and people who loved her. "I have something to tell you," she said. Something in her voice made him pull back to look at her face. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Dawson's expression went through a series of rapid changes: shock, joy, fear, wonder, before settling on something that looked like reverence. "You're sure?" "As sure as I can be. I haven't bled in 2 months. I'm sick every morning. My breasts are tender." She smiled. "And I've been craving pickles at odd hours, which Margaret says is a sure sign." "A baby?" Dawson's voice was hushed. "We're having a baby. Are you happy?" Instead of answering, he picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with tears he didn't bother hiding. Happy doesn't even begin to cover it. Terrified, maybe. Amazed. Grateful. He kissed her softly. "Eliza Cole, you keep giving me things I didn't know I needed. First yourself, now this. We don't know if I'll carry to term," she warned. "These things don't always—" "Then we'll face that if it happens. But right now, in this moment, we're happy." He placed his hand on her stomach. "Our child. Part you, part me. Part everything we've built together." The news spread through the ranch like wildfire. By noon, every hand knew. By evening, they'd organized a celebration that Eliza tried to protest but was ultimately too touched to refuse. The men treated her like she was made of glass, which was simultaneously annoying and endearing. They insisted on carrying anything heavy, fought over who got to chop vegetables, refused to let her lift the heavy pots off the stove. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she'd protested. "Don't care," Flint had said flatly. "You're carrying precious cargo. We're being careful with you. It's going to be a long 7 months if you all act like this." "Get used to it," Thomas had added. "That baby is going to be the most protected child in Wyoming, 20 uncles making sure nothing bad happens." Eliza had felt her eyes fill with tears. The hormones were making her emotional at the strangest times. 20 uncles? "Damn right," Dutch had confirmed. "We're family now. That makes the baby ours too. Ours to protect, ours to spoil, ours to teach all the important things." "What important things?" Dawson had asked suspiciously. "How to ride, how to rope, how to tell if a man's honest by looking in his eyes." Flint had grinned. "Don't worry, boss. We'll make sure the kid knows right from wrong." "That's what I'm afraid of," Dawson had muttered, but Eliza could see he was pleased. Winter came hard that year, but the ranch was ready. They'd stockpiled supplies, repaired every building until it was weather-tight, moved the cattle to protected valleys. And when the first major storm hit in November, they weathered it with the confidence of people who'd survived worse. Eliza's pregnancy progressed steadily. She was sick for the first 3 months, violently, exhaustingly sick. But Dr. Harrison assured her it was normal and actually a good sign. "Means the baby's strong," he'd said, "taking what it needs." By her 4th month, the sickness had passed and been replaced by a ravenous hunger that made the men laugh. "Never thought I'd see the day Miss Eliza ate more than Flint," Jessie had marveled, watching her put away her 3rd helping of stew. "Growing a person takes energy," she'd said without embarrassment. "I'm eating for 2. "More like eating for 3, Thomas had teased. "You sure there's not twins in there?" Eliza had thrown a biscuit at him. As winter deepened and her belly grew, she found herself taking on a different role at the ranch. She still cooked, with help now from a cheerful woman named Anna who'd come from town looking for work, but she also became something else: a confidant, a counselor, a source of wisdom for people struggling with the harsh realities of frontier life. Women started seeking her out. Wives of homesteaders struggling with isolation and fear, young mothers overwhelmed by the demands of caring for children in a place with no doctors nearby. Even a few of the prostitutes from Coldwater, looking for medical advice they couldn't get anywhere else without judgment. Eliza helped them all, shared her knowledge of herbs and remedies, listened to their problems without offering platitudes or easy answers, gave them food and warmth and the sense that someone cared whether they lived or died. "You're building something," Dawson told her one evening as they sat by the fire. his hand resting on her rounded belly. Something bigger than just feeding people. What am I building? Community, connection, a place where people know they can come when they're in trouble. He smiled. You're making the ranch into something more than cattle and land. You're making it matter. It already mattered. You built that. I built a business. You're building a home. There's a difference. Eliza leaned into him, feeling their child move under his palm. We're building it together. Yes, he agreed. Together. The spring returned, and with it came new life everywhere. Calves were born in the pastures. Foals stumbled on spindly legs beside their mothers. Wildflowers pushed through the last patches of snow, determined and beautiful. And Eliza's belly grew round and full. She was 7 months pregnant when the letter arrived from Philadelphia. Dawson brought it to her in the cookhouse, his expression unreadable. It's from Lillian, he said. Eliza's hand stilled on the bread dough she was kneading. What does she want? I haven't opened it. Thought maybe we should read it together. They sat at the big table, and Dawson broke the seal. The letter was short, written in elegant script on expensive paper. Dear Dawson, he read aloud, I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing to apologize for my behavior during my visit to your ranch. I was cruel and spiteful, and I took out my own disappointments on someone who didn't deserve it. Your wife, Eliza, showed me more grace than I showed her, and I've thought about that often in the months since I left. I married recently to a man my family approved of. He's wealthy and well-connected, and I should be happy. But watching you with Eliza made me realize I've never had what you two have. Real partnership, real love, real respect. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that you were right to choose her. She's worth 10 of me, perhaps more. I wish you both every happiness. Sincerely, Lillian Voss Pemberton. Eliza sat in silence after he finished, trying to process the words. She apologized, she said finally. She did. Do you think she means it? Dawson folded the letter carefully. I think she married someone for the wrong reasons and now regrets it. I think watching us made her realize what she gave up when she chose status over substance. He took Eliza's hand. And I think she's right. You are worth 10 of her, maybe more. I don't need her validation. I know you don't, but it's still nice to have her admit she was wrong. He smiled. Besides, now you have written proof that you won. It wasn't a competition, wasn't it? His thumb traced circles on her palm. She tried to make you feel small, tried to convince you that you didn't belong, tried to take me away from you, and you stood your ground. Saved my men, saved a child, built a life here that she could never understand. He lifted her hand to his lips. You didn't just win, Eliza. You won so completely that she had to acknowledge it. Eliza thought about the woman she'd been when Lillian had arrived, frightened and insecure, ready to believe she wasn't enough. Then she thought about who she was now, pregnant and powerful, surrounded by love, certain of her place. I'm not the same person I was, she said quietly. No, you're better, stronger, more sure of yourself. Dawson's eyes were warm, though you were always strong. You just didn't know it yet. They burned the letter together that evening, watching the expensive paper curl and blacken in the stove. It felt symbolic somehow, letting go of the past, of the insecurity and fear, of the woman who'd tried to make Eliza doubt herself. That was behind them now. The baby came on a warm day in late May, when the valley was green and lush and the air smelled of wildflowers and new grass. Eliza's labor started just after dawn. She was making breakfast when the first pain hit, sharp and unmistakable. She grabbed the edge of the counter, breathing through it, and when it passed, she calmly informed Anna that the baby was coming. Anna's eyes went wide. Now? Soon! Send someone for Dr. Harrison and tell Dawson. The ranch erupted into controlled chaos. Jesse rode for the doctor at a gallop that probably terrified his horse. The men cleared the cookhouse, giving Eliza privacy while hovering anxiously outside. Margaret arrived with clean linens and hot water and the calm competence of someone who'd done this before. Dawson refused to leave. I'm staying, he said firmly when Dr. Harrison suggested he might be more comfortable elsewhere. It's not going to be pleasant, the doctor warned. I don't care. She's my wife. That's my child. I'm staying. Eliza had been about to tell him to go, but something in his voice stopped her. She'd spent her whole life managing pain alone. Maybe it was time to let someone share the burden. "Stay," she said, "but don't blame me if you pass out. I've seen calves born. I can handle this. This is different. I know." He took her hand. "But we're doing it together." Labor was brutal and beautiful and longer than Eliza had expected. Hours of pain that built and crested and built again. Hours of Dr. Harrison checking her progress, and Margaret wiping her face with cool cloths, and Dawson holding her hand so tight she thought his bones might break. Outside, the men waited. Eliza could hear them through the walls, their voices low and worried, their boots scuffing the porch as they paced. Her family, worried for her. Finally, as the sun was setting and painting the world gold and orange, Dr. Harrison said the words she'd been desperately waiting to hear. "It's time to push." The next 30 minutes were a blur of pain and effort, and Dr. Harrison's calm instructions and Dawson's voice in her ear telling her she could do this. She was strong enough, almost there. And then, a cry. High and indignant and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Dr. Harrison announced, holding up a tiny squalling bundle. "A healthy baby girl." Eliza started crying before she even held her daughter. Tears of relief and joy and wonder at this tiny person she'd created. Dr. Harrison cleaned the baby quickly and placed her on Eliza's chest, and the world narrowed to this moment. This small, perfect weight. This tiny face scrunched with displeasure at being born. These miniature fingers that gripped Eliza's thumb with surprising strength. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "I'm your mama." Dawson was crying too, not even trying to hide it. His finger traced their daughter's cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from his work-roughened hands. "She's perfect," he said hoarsely. "Eliza, she's perfect." "She is." Eliza couldn't look away from her daughter's face. "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at this tiny person with a full head of dark hair and eyes that would probably be gray like her father's, only one name felt right. "Hope," Eliza said. "Her name is Hope." Dawson smiled through his tears. "Hope, Cole, it's perfect." Outside, the men were whooping and celebrating. Someone had obviously told them the baby was born healthy. Eliza could hear them congratulating each other like they'd personally accomplished something. "Should we let them see her?" Dawson asked. "Not yet. Just let me have this moment. Just us." So they sat together, Dawson, Eliza, and baby Hope, and marveled at the miracle they'd created. Later, after Eliza had been cleaned up and moved to a proper bed, after she'd eaten and rested and Dr. Harrison had pronounced both mother and baby healthy, they finally let the men in. They came in small groups, these rough cowboys rendered speechless by the sight of a newborn. They brought gifts, carved toys, soft blankets, a tiny pair of boots that wouldn't fit for years. They spoke in hushed voices, as if afraid to disturb the baby. Flint was the last to come. He stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable, until Eliza beckoned him closer. "Want to hold her?" she asked. "I'll break her." "You won't. Come on." Carefully, so carefully it was almost comical, Flint took Hope in his massive, scarred hands. The baby looked impossibly small against his chest. He stared down at her with an expression of absolute wonder. "She's so little," he said. "How is anything this little even alive?" "She's tougher than she looks," Eliza said. "She's got cold blood, and she's got all of you to protect her." "Damn right." Flint's voice was rough. "Anyone tries to hurt this kid, they'll have to go through all of us." "I know. That's why I'm not worried." After Flint left, Dawson climbed into bed beside Eliza, carefully, so as not to jostle her or the baby. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For her. For you. For this life." He kissed Eliza's temple. "A year ago, I was alone running a ranch that felt more like a burden than a home. Now, I have a wife I love, a daughter who's perfect, and a ranch that's thriving, and it's all because you said yes when I asked if you could cook." Eliza laughed softly. "I said yes because I was desperate, and you were my only option. And I asked because I was desperate, and you were my only option. Look how well that worked out." She looked at their daughter, sleeping peacefully between them. Looked at the man who'd given her a chance when no one else would. looked at the life they'd built together from nothing but determination and hope. Yes, she agreed. Look how well it worked out. The first year of Hope's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and tender moments. Eliza had worried she wouldn't know how to be a mother, but it turned out that motherhood, like everything else, was something you learned by doing. She learned to function on 3 hours of sleep, learned to nurse while cooking, learned to interpret different types of cries and what each one meant. And she wasn't alone. The men helped in ways that would have shocked anyone who didn't know them. Jesse was a natural at getting Hope to sleep, something about his gentle voice and patient rocking. Thomas made her laugh with funny faces. Dutch carved her toys that she'd treasure for years. Even Flint, terrifying Flint, turned into a marshmallow around the baby. Don't tell anyone, Mike, he'd growled at Eliza one afternoon when she found him singing a lullaby to Hope. Your secret's safe with me. The ranch continued to grow. By Hope's first birthday, they had 40 hands, a second bunkhouse, and enough cattle to make Cole Ranch one of the most successful operations in Wyoming. But more importantly, they had community. The ranch had become a gathering place for everyone in the territory who needed help. Homesteaders struggling to survive, women fleeing bad situations, children who needed a safe place to land. Eliza welcomed them all, fed them, helped them, connected them with resources and people who could assist when she couldn't. You're building an empire, Dawson told her one evening as they watched Hope take her first wobbly steps across the porch. I'm just helping people. That's what empires are built on. Not force, not fear, just people helping people until the whole thing becomes something bigger than any one person could create alone. Eliza caught Hope before she toppled, her daughter's delighted giggle making her heart squeeze. I never wanted an empire. I just wanted to belong. And now people belong because of you. Dawson pulled her close, Hope squirming between them. You took a woman who'd been told her whole life she wasn't enough and proved everyone wrong. You built a home out of nothing. You created family out of strangers. You... His voice caught. You're the strongest person I've ever known. I learned from watching you. No. You taught me. Taught me that strength isn't just about working hard or refusing to quit. It's about caring for people even when you're tired, about fighting for what matters even when you're scared, about choosing love over fear. He kissed her softly. You taught me everything that matters. That night, after Hope was asleep in her crib and the ranch was quiet, Eliza stood at the window of their bedroom and looked out over the valley. Somewhere out there was Coldwater, where she'd been invisible and unwanted, where people had looked through her like she didn't exist, where she'd learned to make herself small and quiet and easy to overlook. That woman was gone now. In her place stood Eliza Cole, wife, mother, friend to dozens, anchor to a community that depended on her strength. A woman who'd learned that worth wasn't given by others, but claimed by refusing to disappear. She'd come to this ranch with nothing but her grandmother's recipes and a cast iron skillet. She'd been tested and judged and forced to prove herself every single day. And she'd done more than survive. She'd thrived. She'd built a life that mattered, created a home that welcomed everyone, raised a daughter who would grow up knowing she was wanted and loved and valued. She'd transformed not just herself, but everyone around her. Dawson's arms came around her from behind, and she leaned into him, grateful for his steady presence. What are you thinking? He asked. That I'm happy, really, truly happy, and I never thought I'd be able to say that. You deserve happiness. I know. She turned in his arms. It took me a long time to believe it, but I know now. I deserve good things. I deserve love. I deserve to take up space in the world. You take up all the space you want. He smiled. You've earned it. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, while their daughter slept peacefully in the next room and their ranch sprawled across the valley under a sky full of stars. Eliza had come here believing she was worthless, had been told her whole life that no one would want her, that she had nothing to offer, that she'd always be alone. But she'd proved them all wrong, not by becoming someone different, not by changing herself to fit what others expected, but by refusing to believe the lies, by showing up every day and doing the work, by caring for people even when they didn't care back, by fighting for her place even when everyone said she didn't deserve one. She'd saved herself by saving others. And in doing so, she'd discovered the truth that had been inside her all along. She had always been enough. She'd always been worthy. She'd always deserved love and respect and a place to call home. She just hadn't known it yet. But now she did. And that knowledge, that bone-deep certainty of her own worth, was the greatest gift she could give her daughter. The assurance that Hope would grow up knowing she mattered, that her voice deserved to be heard, that she could be strong and soft, fierce and gentle, powerful and kind, that she could be exactly who she was, and that would always be enough. Years later, when people asked about Cole Ranch and how it became what it was, they told different stories. Some said it was Dawson Cole's business acumen and dedication to fair treatment. Others credited the quality of the land and the cattle. A few mentioned the loyalty of the crew, the way the men stayed year after year instead of drifting like most cowboys did. But those who really knew, the ones who'd been there from the beginning, knew the truth. Cole Ranch thrived because of Eliza, because she'd transformed it from a place of work into a place of belonging, because she'd shown everyone that caring for people wasn't weakness, but the greatest strength of all, because she'd refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier. She never forgot where she'd come from, never forgot what it felt like to be invisible and unwanted, and because she remembered, she made sure no one who came to Cole Ranch ever felt that way. The cookhouse door was always open. The table always had room for one more. The stove always had something warm waiting. And Eliza, no longer the quiet, unwanted woman from Coldwater, but a force of nature in her own right, stood at the center of it all, proving every single day that worth wasn't determined by beauty or refinement or other people's opinions. Worth was determined by how you treated people when no one was watching, by the work you did when you were exhausted, by the love you gave even when you were scared. And by that measure, Eliza Cole was worth everything. She'd started with nothing but refused to stay there. She'd been tested and had passed. She'd been told she wasn't enough and had proved them wrong. She'd saved a ranch, raised a daughter, and built a community. But most importantly, she'd saved herself. And in a harsh land that demanded strength and offered little comfort, that was the most remarkable achievement of all. The woman they'd called worthless had become invaluable. The woman no one wanted had become irreplaceable. The woman who'd been invisible had become impossible to ignore. She'd refused to disappear. And in refusing, she'd shown everyone that the only opinion that mattered was your own. That you didn't need permission to take up space. That you didn't need to be chosen to matter. You just needed to choose yourself. And everything else would follow.